Yes, I am the Consul General of the Netherlands here in Dubai, but I'm also the Commissioner General for the Netherlands here at the Expo. That means I'm always hosting and I'm always present here on crucial moments at the Netherlands Pavilion. And this is one of the crucial moments, important moments. So I'm very proud to be here and welcome you to this platform, because that's exactly what we want to do, is to offer platforms for people like you to get together and create new bright ideas for challenges in the world, like the topic we're discussing today, you are discussing today, building a more sustainable marine life infrastructure. And let me briefly tell you a little bit about what this pavilion is about. It's about uniting water, energy, and food. So it's a circular concept. And the way that the Netherlands is presenting this beautiful pavilion is in such a way that after the Expo, you will not find any trace of us having been here anymore from a physical perspective. So this whole pavilion will be given back to nature, or providers that will use the materials for other type of projects. One of them is marine development, so marine infrastructure development, because the walls you can see here, they're often used in marine development projects. Now, I know that one of the topics is going to be building with nature. I've seen that in many countries I have been posted. My last posting was in Vietnam. Really a topic, building with nature is very popular there. The Vietnamese were always really interested in sharing ideas with the Netherlands counterparts. And I see that here in the UAE, but also in the region, there is appetite for these kind of exchange of knowledge. So I think in terms of timing, it's wonderful that we are getting these groups together and working on these topics. Going back to the pavilion, I think the success of this pavilion, generating 800 liters of water every day from the desert air here in Dubai, using that water for cooling the whole pavilion and producing food with solar energy, that whole concept, which is a circular concept, is basically created because of a way of thinking. And that's a way of thinking that you will find back in a lot of topics. It's engineering, so it's a lot of innovation, engineering, people thinking, calculating, combined with art. And you find that also here. So there's a lot of very intelligent solutions combined with artistic components. And I think that if you combine engineering and art, you give a huge drive to innovation. You get bright new ideas, bright new dreams that you can realize. So this project started 3 years ago with a dream, and the technologies were not there yet. I mean, it was only, there were concepts. But by bringing all the thinkers together and working towards building this dream, it worked. It is all here. We realized it. So I would like to conclude here and wish you a very productive day. And I hope that the sharing of ideas will bring also new dreams, and that you will realize very amazing projects in the future, contributing to the topic, which is sustainable marine infrastructure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And well, have a good day also here, and hope you will have also the time to enjoy this beautiful pavilion during the lunch and have the experience. It's highly recommended. So let me continue with a brief overview of today's program. But first, well, we're talking about climate positive marine developments, but what do we actually mean by that? So if I can have the next slide, please. We used to have a lot of marine developments over many decades already. And the way was that we approached that before is trying to minimize the impact on the environment, the impact on the climate. So this is what we started off with, the traditional engineering. But we got smarter. We knew that climate change would be an important topic. So we're nowadays aiming a lot for climate neutral developments. And one way to do that is with compensation projects, for example. But what if we could actually create a better biodiversity, if we can create a better climate with the things that we develop in the marine environment? We've seen and we've learned a lot of things over the past years in academics, but also in R&D within different corporations, that this is actually possible. So why don't we look at each and every element of a development that we're taking, looking at the integral picture and see how we can make everything creating more biodiversity or capturing more carbon. So basically, we aim to build more than there was before. That's what we want to discuss today. And I'll show you now in the next slide the program of today, how it's been set up. So in a minute, we will start. Next slide, please. In a minute, we will start with 2 keynote lectures. I think, yes, there we are. The 2 keynote lectures, one by Henk Ovink and one by Kees Al-Suwaidi from the ministry here, describing the situation, giving inspiring talk about what is happening in the world around these topics, around climate change as well. Then we'll have 5 experts pitching inspirational ideas on different types of angles. So we will have an artist like Mr. Richter just mentioned as well, combining art and science, but we'll also look at it from a nature point of view, ecology point of view, an engineering point of view, but also finance and governance, because what we want to discuss today is the total package. We don't want to just dream on engineering solutions, we want to discuss the total package on how to make this really happening. So those inspirational pitches will feed into a panel discussion with high-level panelists that will also respond to the questions, where are opportunities, where may still lie challenges, and what would be good next steps and needs to take. Well, that concludes the morning session. In the afternoon, on the next slide, please, we will have an interactive roundtable workshop. So we will have breakouts on the round tables here. We will do that physically and online. So this is a fully hybrid event. It's also a big experiment for us, so let's see how it goes. We will be discussing the same 4 topics that I just mentioned to see how we can make that more concrete, how we can tackle those questions. And the results of these roundtable discussions will be pitched back at the end of the day into a plenary discussion. After this session, we would like to capture all the results and the ideas that we share with each other into a white paper and something that we can use and also work further on, also to discuss after this session to see how we can take the concept of climate positive marine development to the next level. So this is the overview of today. I will stop talking, but I will start introducing Mr. Henk Ovink, our first keynote speaker. He will be joining us virtually. Good morning. Oh, good morning, Henk. Great that you could join in this interesting session, and I'll give you a brief introduction. Mr. Henk Ovink is our special envoy for international water affairs for the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and he was appointed in 2015 by the Dutch cabinet as the first special envoy for international water affairs. As the ambassador for water, he's responsible for advocating water awareness around the world, building institutional capacity and coalitions amongst governments, multilateral organizations, private sector and NGOs, and initiating innovative approach to address the world's stressing needs on water. So with that, Henk, please go ahead.
Thanks very much. And I tried to share some slides I prepared, but that's okay. It didn't work. So, ladies and gentlemen, also Consul General Caro, very good to see you in your new environment. It's great to see that some of you are present at the unique Netherlands Pavilion at the Dubai Expo. It's a biotope where water, energy and food are united through innovation and the connections between the 3 sectors are shown. The Netherlands Pavilion also is a place to connect. So it's not only water, food and energy, but it's really about people, like we do today. And my participation today, while virtual, I hope to visit the Dubai Expo, of course, in the next month. 6 years ago, 2015, do we remember the Paris Agreement, agreed upon, COP21, clear targets, 2 degrees or with an ambition of 1.5 degrees Celsius global mean surface temperature increase. An agreement among over 190 countries around climate mitigation, but also adaptation, 50-50 part of the Paris Agreement. But as we are heading for COP26, next month in November in Glasgow, the climate crisis only has become bigger. Water and climate change are directly linked. And we know this by default and from our disasters. Climate change manifests itself primarily through changes in the water cycle. As climate changes, droughts, floods, melting glaciers, sea level rise and storms intensify or alter, often with severe consequences, as we have seen in my country this summer, but as we can see across the world every day. Our climate crisis is a water crisis. 9 out of 10 natural disasters are water related. And since the 70s, weather disasters are striking the world 4 to 5 times more often and causing 7 times more damage. In the past 5 decades, such disasters have caused $3.6 trillion in economic damage. This is like massive. Recent IPCC report, International Panel for Climate Change 2021, but also, of course, the extreme weather events around the globe, underline the urgent need to step up our collective actions to keep the 1.5 degrees temperature goal in reach. Especially the report's conclusion on the increase in weather extremes, such as heat waves, heavy precipitation, droughts, and tropical cyclones, caught the eye. Every year, we see the reality of climate change all around the globe. An extreme weather event will occur more frequently as the world endeavored this year severe challenges with heat waves from Canada to the Mediterranean and floodings in my home country, as said, of the Netherlands and neighboring countries, Belgium and Germany, and in China. These disasters are proof that climate change is here and now, and that our systems are not fit for our future of climate extremes. Business as usual is no longer an option. If we are to create a climate resilient future, how we value water must be taken into account. Water underpins all our social and economic activities. We depend on reliable, clean supply of drinking water to sustain our health. The current COVID-19 pandemic has reiterated that water is our first line of defense. And we need water for agriculture, energy production, recreation, and manufacturing. Water underpins all 70 of the Sustainable Development Goals. Without water, food production stops, cities cease to function, economic activity grinds to a halt, and greenery turns to desert. Learning to value water will unlock the synergies and accelerate the action we're all working. It will bring about better health, improved food security, more effective climate action, and less migration. Building resiliency through action on water, especially for the most vulnerable, will directly affect economic health and stability worldwide positively. That is why the Netherlands continuously urges the international community to step up their game to accelerate the implementation of Sustainable Goal 6 and all the other water-related goals. As said, water is an essential enabler, a springboard for coping with the effects of climate change. Therefore, we have to involve all stakeholders. Water can drive us apart, but water can also bring us together. There's the SDG 6 Global Acceleration Framework. It's clear on this point. To scale up concrete actions by different actors in the areas of finance, data and information, capacity development, innovation and governance, we must become radically inclusive. We need integrated approaches, new partnerships, and a long-term strategy in order to achieve real and sustainable progress. The Netherlands this year hosted the Climate Adaptation Summit in January, and a lot has happened since. During the Climate Adaptation Summit, the Adaptation Action Agenda was launched, with new and enhanced actions in all sectors of adaptation, such as water, infrastructure, nature-based solutions, finance, cities, food, and local adaptation. Furthermore, The Adaptation Action Coalition, to further the work of the Climate Adaptation Summit, was launched, and from the 6 founding members, it increased to over 35 member countries working on water, infrastructure, local adaptation, national adaptation plans, disaster risk reduction, and health. Next stepping stone after the Climate Adaptation Summit, the upcoming Climate Summit in Glasgow, is the UN Water Conference in 2023. The first conference since 1977, the second in the history of the UN, the second time where the world will come together on water. Co-chaired by the Netherlands and Tajikistan. And it will give a voice to all stakeholders so that they can meaningfully contribute and take part in determining and developing the process as well as the substance. Multi-stakeholder participation is required to make commitments, share lessons and experiences, and forge partnerships at all levels. Consultation and dialogue, increasing participatory engagement and partnerships will help us find cooperative solutions and actions and will help deliver benefits for all. Water is a basic good. It integrates social, cultural, economic, political, and environmental values. It's cross-cutting. It supports the achievement of all sustainable development goals because of its close links with climate, with energy, with cities, the environment, food security, poverty, gender equality, health, and many, many, many more topics. In short, water is the pillar of sustainable development. And we need to understand these complex relationships and interdependencies better, value water holistically and sustainably, and manage water inclusively at all scales and across all interests, as was said and concluded by the high-level panel on water. If we do so, water can be the deal maker, the leverage for sustainable development, the springboard for our innovative actions. Water brings all stakeholders to the same table, forging coalitions and finding best solutions that can be scaled up. And in the run-up to 2023, the Netherlands will make every effort to mobilize all stakeholders, coalitions and partners. Focus our programs and investments on achievement of the SDGs, but we also need you to spread the word and get everyone moving. Moving from freshwater to saltwater, the global ocean covers 71% of the Earth's surface and contains about 97% of the Earth's water. The ocean supports unique habitats and they are interconnected with other components of the climate system through global exchange of water, energy, and carbon. If this is to tell us anything, it is that the importance of healthy oceans cannot be overestimated. The ocean ecosystem and its role as the world's climate regulator is weakening, while the effects of climate change for particularly the most vulnerable communities only worsen. Notwithstanding this, the reality is that SDG 14, Sustainable Development Goal 14, life below water, is largely missing from the conversation, and that is a serious oversight. I have a colleague at the UN, Peter Thompson, Special Envoy for the Oceans, who is working hard every day, relentlessly, to bridge that gap. Continuing business as usual is not an option. We have reached the point that just fighting climate change is a battle lost. We have to drastically reshape our cities, industries, and agriculture to create robust systems that can provide us with food, stable livelihoods, and a safe place to live. These systems have to be designed in such a way that they do not further harm the environment and keep functioning or can be easily adapted to short-term weather extremes or long-term climate change. We have to avoid that solutions in one place become a problem somewhere else. The challenges often accumulate in coastal areas and the ocean. The ocean not only provides us with oxygen, food, and livelihood, but also absorbs the carbon we emit and acts as a buffer to temperature change. For far too long, we assumed the ocean was so vast and deep that no matter how much stress and chemicals we dumped into it, the effects would be minor. But now we hopefully realize the ocean is not invulnerable and that many of the pressures on marine ecosystems originate on land. Plastics, pesticides, and other pollutants pour into rivers and wetlands and form from there into our oceans. And as untreated wastewater, industrial effluents, and excess nutrients rob coastal environments of their oxygen, life below water is lost. And if life below water is lost, so is our future that depends on the services the ocean provides. The sea will give us life as long as we keep it alive. We need to look at these challenges in an optimistic way. We need to study the problems. We need to do research, but for all we need to make use of the knowledge and capacity gained and look for innovative, sustainable, and inclusive solutions. I therefore really like the climate positive approach of today's events. Climate positive development of marine environment towards a sustainable marine infrastructure. A climate positive way of shaping our world, creating opportunities for nature and biodiversity by design. There are already many examples. I will talk about three. One is the building with nature example, Zandmotor in the Netherlands. Large parts of the Dutch coasts are eroding. To safeguard the hinterland, Rijkswaterstaat, our national engineering corps, nourishes the coast frequently. The Zandmotor has been a successful pilot project to explore an alternative solution for depositing large amounts of sand along the Dutch shore. By depositing a large amount of sand in a single operation, we can avoid repeated disruption of the vulnerable seabed. Natural forces such as waves, wind, and tides transport the sand then on the right place for us. This iconic project proved to be not only cost-effective for coastal flood risk reduction perspective, but also creates many co-benefits, including enhanced biodiversity and recreational values. Second example is our salt marsh development, Marconi in Deltares in the north of the Netherlands. Another example of building with nature. At the far northeast coast of the Netherlands, salt marshes are developed with sediment from the port of Deltares and the Eemsdollet estuary. Salt marshes are biodiverse nature areas that mitigate the effects of subsidence and sea level rise. The beneficial reuse of sediments is a relatively new technique for coastal development. Therefore, Dutch research institutes and universities contribute to the strengthening of knowledge needed to optimize the best restoration strategy in this type of the ecosystem. And last of my examples is the source to sea approach. It is as a solution tells us to look at the whole system, a systemic approach from the source out into the sea that it affects. Source to sea approach is an innovative and holistic approach for land-based sources of marine pollution and the preeminent method that allows us to tackle combinations of problems instead of individual ones. Source to sea management is a powerful tool that helps decide which activities should be developed where. And it also goes further than the scope of the IPCC report on climate change and land by connecting the land to rivers and the ocean. As such, Source to Sea is a system-based and grounded in thorough integration. It's radically inclusive and leaves no one behind. It assists in planning climate change adaptation and mitigation, resulting in decision being made to benefit all people within a certain region for the long term, sustainable and resilient. The fact that the problems related to climate change, water management, and the ocean are big and complex is not an argument to wait for someone else better equipped to solve them for us. We have no time to waste, and we should start now. The next years provide ample opportunity to keep building momentum and start applying the Source to Sea method across the globe. All of us should bring our insights of today to future meetings, such as the UN Climate Change Conference in Glasgow this year, the UN Oceans Conference in Lisbon next year, and the UN Water Conference, which the Netherlands will co-chair together with Tajikistan in 2023. We need government leaders to advance coordinated management and implement fitting policy from source to sea. We need international financial institutions to develop financial tools that enable cross-sectoral coordination and evaluation and valuation across the SDGs and upstream, downstream cooperation. But perhaps most importantly, we need mainstream source to sea thinking in the way we grow our food, manage our water, design our cities, industries, and landscape. I encourage you to look further than your own silo and to be aware that your actions may have consequences thousands of kilometers away, and to realize that solving your problem by creating another one somewhere else does not help us any further. We need to listen to each other. We need to learn from each other. We must work together to guarantee that all can benefit from a healthy life on land and below water. Of course, we can do this with a climate positive approach. I wish you a great event, best of success, lots of inspiration, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Henk, for this inspirational speech and very wise words connecting well to the topic of today. I would like to invite our second speaker, Mr. Qais El Sawadi. And Mr. Qais is the director of the Climate Change Center of the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment here in the UAE. In his role, he manages the National Climate Change Adaptation Program, a nationwide multi-sectoral risk assessment and adaptation planning effort aimed at improving the resilience of social, economic and natural systems in the UAE. Qais also leads the implementation of the UAE National Determined Contribution with the aim of reducing the UAE's greenhouse gas emissions in line with the country's economic diversification efforts. And if that's not enough, he's also leading the UAE's Climate Change Research Network, which brings together a group of committed climate scientists and researchers to facilitate the dissemination of knowledge and advance development of research collaborations, like Henk already was advocating. Qais, may I invite you to the stage, please?
Thank you, Robin, for the very generous introduction. Thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you to the Netherlands Pavilion. Thank you to the Deltares as well for making this happen, for putting together this very interesting program. So what I'm going to do, I have a presentation. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go over the climate change plan of the UAE, what the UAE has been doing when it comes to climate action, and then go over some of the impacts of climate change here in the UAE, the impacts we're already seeing, and the impacts we'll probably be seeing in the future. So, next slide. Takes time. It's sustainable, all this has to be sustainable. Okay, there we go. So the climate change plan, so back in 2015, end of 2015, the Paris Agreement was adopted. And straight after that, early 2016, the UAE Ministry of Climate Change and Environment was created as the central policy-making agency here in the UAE when it comes to climate action, taking care of both domestic but also international climate policy. That was early 2016. As soon as the ministry was created, the top priority was to come up with a plan to translate what the climate change, what the Paris Agreement means to the world into terms that our local stakeholders understand and are aligned with, and so that we can create the momentum locally as well and get action done. So 3 key priorities for our climate change plan. One is, of course, climate change mitigation, reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The other important priority is climate change adaptation. Yes, we already live in a hot and arid environment, but it's going to get even worse with climate change. And the third important pillar for us here in the UAE is economic diversification. So we think and we see climate change as an opportunity. The global drive to mitigate climate action, to mitigate climate change is an opportunity for us to diversify our economy, to invest in new sectors and to develop those sectors, especially when it comes to the cheap renewable energy we have here in the UAE. And then we can, the multiple ways you can, of course, use that energy, whether for the electrification of industry, creating green industries, but also cheap, clean energy for general use. And then there is this timeline as to how the plan is going to achieve its goals, starting from 2017. Of course, the development of the plan took us 1.5 years. It involved extensive stakeholder engagement because, after all, what we're striving for is a whole of society approach. It's not about government. It's not just about the polluting sectors. It's not just about NGOs or the academic sectors doing research. It's about all of us. All of us have to do their part when it comes to climate action, especially the private sector and, of course, government. Next slide. Okay. Huh? Is this the next slide? Is this the one? Okay. All right. Now? Yeah, there we go. So when it comes to climate change, mitigation, adaptation, and all these goals I talked about, one key document that we produced here in the UAE was our pledge for the Paris Agreement. So the NDC, the Nationally Determined Contribution, as part of the second cycle of pledges as required by the Paris Agreement. So we pledged, and I don't think this is the second slide. There's a slide before this. Anyway, yeah, there we go. So we committed, first of all, of course, there was a target in our first NDC to achieve a certain level of renewable energy, of clean energy, to bring it to our, to connect it to our grid. But now with our second NDC, and here is the more ambitious step that the UAE has taken, is to commit to an economy-wide emission reduction target of around 25% for 2030. That translates into, an important part of that is our electricity sector. So from just over 100 megawatts of clean electricity in 2015, when the Paris Agreement was adopted, we're talking about, and we're on track to achieve around 14 gigawatts of clean energy by 2030. Next. So the 14 gigawatts, of course, of clean electricity includes nuclear and solar energy. And we're also talking there about, something like $40 billion of investment just for clean energy. 30 million mangroves, nature-based solutions is also an important topic today. So 30 million mangroves. We don't have many options when it comes to nature-based solutions here in the UAE, but this is one key, one important solution we've got with both mitigation and adaptation co-benefits. 30 million mangroves is the commitment to plant mangrove seedlings by 2030. And the other important priority for us as part of the NDC is climate adaptation in all important sectors. Next. Okay, so very quickly, this is just the timeline of climate-related action and climate-related events here in the UAE, starting with oil discovery in 1958 in Abu Dhabi, all the way to electrification just in 1961. Electrification happened here first in Dubai. ADNOC established the Supreme Committee of Environment. So around the 1971, of course, was the year when the UAE was founded. And then Montreal Protocol, of course, 89. UNFCCC ratified 1995, and then our emissions reached around 100 million tons CO2 equivalent around 2001. We're now around 200 million. In the last 20 years, we've been increased by around 100%, the emissions increase, which is, again, because of the developing nature of the country and the different needs for cooling and industry. And then all the way to, of course, many of the flagship projects, flagship renewable energy and clean energy projects. 2016 was when we ratified the Paris Agreement. Climate change plan just after that was also adopted by the UAE's cabinet. Next. Okay, do we recognize this? Is this something you're familiar with? You are. Anyone else? No? So these are the stripes, the climate stripes for the UAE. So each and every line of these, this is starting in 1901 all the way to 2020. And as you can see, the blue lines tell you that there is temperatures are okay. But then the more you move into the future, reaching 2020, you see that the lines become red and red, more red, as we go further, because temperatures are increasing compared to our pre-industrial levels. So again, as I said in the beginning, temperatures are high already here in the country, but then they're already hotter than they used to be, and it's going to only get worse with a changing climate. Next. And here again, we're talking about the impacts. So impacts of climate change in the UAE. These are the historical impacts. We're going to talk about the projected impacts in a couple of slides. So here, again, these are the temperatures. Starting 1901, the trend is clear. Temperatures are going up. And there was some acceleration after 1980. And then the trend is even higher. So when it comes to temperatures, it's very clear. But again, on average, we're around 1 degree higher, as the case with the global increase in temperature. So around 1 degree increase compared to pre-industrial era. Next. So temperatures here, each line of these represents a decade, starting 1905. So what we can see here is when it comes to temperatures, most of the increases are happening in the summer months. So it's just in the hotter months, they're getting even hotter, and the increase is just much higher. So if you look at this, the blue line, light blue, and the dark blue, 2015, that's the 2015, the upper line, and then 1905 is the lower line. If you see the summer months is the highest, it's around 2 degrees or more increase. In the winter months, it's better. So our winters are hotter, but we're still doing better during winter months. So the hotter days are becoming hotter. And again, you can imagine the impact on the fauna and the flora on when there are extreme temperatures in 1 or 2 days even in a year. Next. This is the visibility trend. Now again, these are just trends. We're just plotting data on a sheet. It's not like we're saying this is, the result of climate change, but these are trends we're seeing in the country. The visibility is increasing. Well, there was significant decrease, but then 8 kilometers of visibility is still not bad. But then again, this tells something about the dry conditions, about the desertification in the region, and the dust that travels all the way from the western parts of the Arabian Peninsula and the Levantine region to the UAE. So again, visibility is going down. Next. This is to do with rainfall in 4 different emirates. But this, again, we can't tease out a trend. And one good reason for that is because we don't have enough data. So 1982 up to 2017, there is decrease in some parts of the UAE. Of course, we can't also rule out the impact of cloud seeding. So there is a change. There is a change in rainfall. We can't yet say what sort of change. But again, when it comes to rainfall, it's just very hard to predict a trend or even to say that there is a trend. Next. These are the impacts in pictures. So here, the first one is in Kuwait. This was in 2017. Truck melts into road where there was this very hot day. Again, in Kuwait, this was, I think, this year. Kuwait registers highest temperature on Earth, 53.2 degrees in one day. This is the third picture there is of a flood here in the UAE. And then you can see the destruction. This wasn't a cyclone. It was just a normal sort of heavy rain event. And then that was the impact. And then the fourth picture is, of course, a speculation, because we're here talking about urban fires. So we don't see, thankfully, wildfires in the UAE because we don't have forests. But we can see urban fires. And you can always make links that, urban fires, increase in frequency during hotter days. But that still remains a speculation, maybe. our researchers and people who do research can help us with this. Next. Gono. We just, thankfully, there was Cyclone Shaheen, which has, has made, its way out already, but then the destruction it left behind still doesn't amount to the destruction caused by Gono back in 2007. And that was the strongest cyclone that has hit this part of the world in the last 100 years. And then the problem with this is, of course, extreme events, the frequency and intensity of extreme events, which worries us with climate change, and which is also researched, the IPCC and otherwise has always highlighted that extreme events might increase in intensity and frequency because of climate change. Next. Here is just one slide on the projections. So we did this exercise at the Ministry of Climate Change to understand the impacts of climate change, how climate is going to change here in the UAE in terms of the climate variables, and then the impacts of these variables were studied as part of the National Adaptation Program. So here it was a literature review. It was a mini IPCC sort of exercise that we did. We looked at all literature that was published in the last 5 to 10 years on the UAE and the broader region, and this is what we found out. Salinity is going to increase in the Arabian Gulf. With rainfall, we think most of the research says that it's going to increase, but then it's not the good rainfall. It's the more intense rainfall that's going to increase, putting pressure on our infrastructure, on our roads. Humidity going to still increase. Sea level rise, of course. Temperatures, definitely. Groundwater, impacts on groundwater. Intrusion of salt water into groundwater, but then also lowering levels of groundwater. Extreme events, again, the research is not quite as established as temperature, for example, but still we think that intensity and frequency of extreme events will increase. And ocean acidification, of course. Acidifying oceans with its impacts on the biodiversity and marine life is also something we expect. And the full report, you can find it on our website, and we'll hopefully be publishing a similar sort of report regularly every 3 to 5 years. And that, of course, should help whoever's doing adaptation work, whoever trying to understand the impacts of climate change when it comes to our part of the world, that report should help them. This is the National Adaptation Program, of course, putting the projections and what we know about changing climate into action, translating these trends into what they mean for different economic sectors, and then working together with all partners to address these impacts. So we did this risk assessment exercise back in 2019, and we did it for 4 priority sectors. These sectors were infrastructure, energy, environment, and health. We prioritized the risks, and we're working together with our stakeholders, Ministry of Health, Infrastructure, Energy, to address those risks. Next. These are the reports that you can also go back to. They're also available on our website, including the risk assessment framework that we used in the National Adaptation Program. And this is one of our also initiatives that we worked on to really address the challenge that we have. In doing adaptation work, climate adaptation, understanding the impacts of climate change, data is really scarce when it comes to our part of the world. Research as to the impacts of climate change is also very rare. So what we tried to do was to bring together all researchers interested in climate change, and I see some members of CCRN here as well. And Deltares, by the way, is also a partner of CCRN. So to bring these researchers together so that we can, first of all, prioritize, come up with a research agenda when it comes to climate change adaptation here in the UAE, prioritize research areas, work on addressing the data gaps and the knowledge gaps together. And then we just started, but again, CCRN is open for everyone who's interested in doing research to also join and help us, advance this initiative further. And by the way, there'll be an event, a CCRN event, GCA, the Global Commission on Adaptation. The executive director will also be giving or the opening remarks of the event tomorrow at DEC. So that's my last slide. The next slide is just going to say thank you. So thank you very much for your time, and hopefully you found something useful.
Guys, thank you so much for your inspiring speech. And I think it's, well, very much showing the urgency also to act and to come up with innovative ways to counter these trends and to see how we can deal with that. So thank you so much to our two keynote speakers. I think we've got already a whole lot of information that we can talk about further. We're going to have a 5-minute break so you can get some refreshments at the bar, and we'll resume with the inspirational pitches just after that. Interesting session. We already had some very interesting keynotes this morning, and we would like to continue with the inspirational pitches from the different experts. We've got 5 of them in total, and we'll start with Mr. Ad Verhegge. Ad Verhegge is an artist and inventor and has always been fascinated with climate change and its effects on the world and people. Instead of focusing just on the negative impacts, Ad decided to look for opportunities that climate change brings. So under the title Art Meets Science, he's been working over the past years on remarkable art projects and inventions that bring solutions to climate change issues in a creative and artistic way. Ab, can I invite you?
Thank you very much. After we just had the introduction about what's happening on this planet, and it's unbelievable. I even was shocked by the presentation of the experts from the Emirates. I didn't know it had that much impact on this location. Last week we had a hurricane just across the border. I think it's also close like this, that this event actually can happen. So to put it a bit in a contrast, but I'm focused on solutions. I'm an artist, and I thought by myself, is it possible to build a completely autonomously running glacier in the middle of a hot and dry desert, powered by solar cells on top? They make energy, and we cool the surface at the downside, shadow side, and we create ice. This project idea came up in 2010, but we changed in 2015 the focus from making ice to water, because drought became a real issue in such a small period of time. Next slide, please. I'm an artist. I'm not a scientist. So I thought by myself, how can we make water? There are 3 elements free and everywhere available on this planet. It's air, sunlight, gravity. If we can use this to the maximum to produce water, then we can harvest water, solar powered, off-grid, very cheap. That was the initiative. Next slide, please. We came up with a problem. We tested the conventional dehumidifying equipments in the desert of Mali, and we noticed that we produced water, but it evaporated within the system. See it as a cola can. It's cold on a hot summer's day. You sit outside. Air is coming to the cold surface, and The water vapor is condensing on the surface. It's not that your can is leaking, but what you see is condensed water vapor. What happens when it's going too hot? You produce water, it drips down, but it evaporates, so it's useless. Next slide, please. We came up with a solution, and it's called a Growing Waterfall. We have a closed box, and we have cold water that we run from the ceiling. It's powered the power is used for a fan or water pump cooler. The fan injects air into the system. The water vapor and the air starts to condense, and the water drops, they are growing during the fall. So where the waterfall starts at the top, it has less water than down, where you have more water. So this is a very simple abstraction of what we are doing. Next slide, please. For the Dutch Ministry of Defense, we built a couple of machines using this technology. They are made of mobile flight cases, not too big. It's like this. They can be attached to solar, and they produce between 20 and 30 liters of water a day. It's not much, but it's enough to survive. And think, I just showed what's in it. It's more than 90% air, so they are light in weight. You can transport them very easy. Next slide, please. On top of the pavilion here, we built a bit bigger one. That's the technology. It's a 20-foot container, but it's, as I told, nearly empty. But here, together with the solar panels from Marianne Obel, we produce electricity for this small container. And here we produce between 1,000 and 2,000 liters per day. The water that is produced, that that is able to maintain a kind of a microclimate. As you can see around you, you see the greens, they get the water. It's a brilliant concept of V8 architects from the Netherlands. But I'm very happy that we can show what we can do with this technology. Next slide, please. As you can see, when you walk inside this cone, you see the release of the water during a great show. And it's also fine that you experience the cold water coming down. It's getting cold, it's going fresh, and you can grow what you want. So I think this proves that in future we are capable to create microclimates for greenhouses, name it. Water is not really the issue anymore, but it's only a sense of a matter of how do we use it. How can we integrate new technologies to find solutions for the future? Next slide, please. I was called by Bob Hogedoren, Jos Frink from Deltares. We have a small problem. Next slide, please. They work already for decades at a great project, and it's called olivine. It's a rock, one of the most common rocks in the world, that can extract CO2 from air. It transforms into chalk. It's only one bitty thing. It needs 30 years. When you have time enough, no problem. You lay it on the ground, it starts to, with erosion process, and you transform, so you don't have to do anything, and you're already transforming in a chemical way the olivine and chalk, CO2 and chalk. Next slide, please. I was asked, as an outsider, can you think about this? How can we speed up maybe the processes? And I came up, I built a tube. And what's in the tube? We have water and olivine. We press air in it, and the CO2 comes into contact with the olivine, and there you see it, it makes chalk, and we let the particles bounce to each other. We clean them with only a bit of air. So the air makes the particles hit them to each other, and the chalk breaks loose. Next slide, please. And this is fantastic. We made a sculpture. We built a sculpture with this idea. And when you look here, this could be a new revolution. This is the inside air. It's 558 parts per million, and the outside is 270. But this is not one moment. No, it's a continuous airstream. It's going on and going on and going on. With these technologies, we could make an impact for the future, because it's not only stopping producing CO2, but we also have to reduce the levels from now. Next slide, please. This is what I mean. I'm a creative man, but I need science to get it on. This is this is how I see the improvement of my projects. We are now maybe here in the 6, maybe 7, but what we can do, it's enormous. I give the ideas, but we have to bring it to products together. Next slide, please. For my water project, we have more information on sunglacier.com, and for the CO2 project, there are many people from Deltares here who you can ask more information about Bob Hogendoren and Jos Vink. Thank you very much, and have a good day.
Thank you very much for this inspiring and ideas from an uncommon angle, I would like to say. And I think this is very inspiring also to see how we can use these type of technologies in our project ourselves, of course. So the next inspirational pitcher I would like to introduce is Dr. Simon Wilson. And he's Technical Director of 5 Oceans Environmental Services LLC. He will be joining us virtually, as you can see. And Simon is an environmental consultant with a broad interest, but has particular experience in coastal and marine ecology in the Gulf region for a long, long time already. He is co-founder of 5 Oceans, and which is an environmental consultancy specializing in the environmental assessments and management of coastal projects. He holds a PhD in coral and reef ecology in the Arabian region, and one of his favorite pastimes is beachcombing and making works of art from found objects. So that links nicely to our previous speaker. Welcome, Simon. Thank you very much, and please go ahead.
That's great. Thank you very much, Robin. If we could have the slides, please.
The slide is on the screen, Simon.
That's great. If we could just scroll through to the next slide, thanks. So I want to just briefly outline some of the ecological impacts that are expected to occur with respect to climate change in the Gulf region. And as I talk, please, if the person operating the slides could just scroll through with me as I talk. So thank you to Case for setting up the framework and the context for this. I'm going to specifically refer to the AGIDI study that was done in 2016 on specifically looking at marine biodiversity and climate change in the Gulf region. It was a very comprehensive study that coupled an atmospheric model with an oceanographic model, and then looked at the ecological impacts of the consequences of that. So it took just a handful of species. There's 817 species known to occur in the Gulf area. It took 56 of that number and determined what the ecological niche requirements were for those species, and then modeled that to see how the environmental conditions would affect the distribution of fish in the area. So my talk today is really about what's the implications with respect to fish, but I'll also talk a little bit about coral before going on to suggest some sort of policy implications of this. The study also looked at marine wildlife and key habitats, including mangroves and coral reefs. And indeed, it went on to analyze the effect or the consequence of a changing distribution of fish with respect to the catch and the socioeconomic impact associated with that. So the model that produced a number of outputs, and I don't want to go into the details of that, but the diagram here with the 6 scenarios there, on the left-hand side is what happens to the distribution of fish. On the right-hand side is how their ecological niches become suboptimal. And each row is a different climate prediction model that was used just to benchmark. There's quite a lot of variability amongst the climate modeling. So I just want to focus in on the top left-hand side. And that shows how fish distributions will change between now and 2090. And essentially, there's going to be a big change with respect to the numbers and distribution of fish in the Southern Gulf. The general pattern is that species will become unable to cope with the hot conditions in the Southern Gulf and will tend to migrate northward where conditions are a bit cooler. But of course, in the Gulf, it's bounded in the north by the landmass of Asia. And as a result of that, those fish that are migrating to higher latitudes will hit a cul-de-sac and not be able to migrate further north. So eventually that's likely to result in local extinctions. But certainly the migration of fish will certainly mean that fish in the Southern Gulf area, particularly in the Emirates, will decline with local extinctions. Next slide, please. So I now want to talk a little bit about coral. The Gulf is the hottest sea in the world. That's just the natural conditions, and it sees temperatures of 33 degrees for several months over the summer. It's as a result of that, corals have adapted to that high thermal environment, and as a result, the corals are amongst the most thermally tolerant coral types in the world. However, in 96 and then again in 98, there was some very significant bleaching events, and that has really set the tone for what's happened since then. So the first events were really captured by Regal in 2002 in his paper, and sort of described the decline of corals and coral communities in the Southern Gulf area. And then a little bit later, Charles Shepherd produced a paper in 2003 looking at the best available data about how temperatures will change, seawater temperatures, and this kind of illustrates how that trend will go. So obviously as temperatures increase, so the extreme events approach ever more the bleaching threshold of 34 degrees. So as temperatures increase, so this bleaching threshold is reached more and more. And this red line shows that where we are in the progression. And obviously it's very significant in the sense that we are right at the point where we can expect bleaching events to occur on an annual basis. Already 70% of coral reefs in the Gulf region have been lost, partly due to bleaching, but also we mustn't forget the effects of human development in coastal zones on this. Next slide, please. So in terms of climate change policy, ROPME, the Regional Organization for the Protection of the Marine Environment, together with CFAS are developing a policy briefing document to really help communicate what the implications are of climate change on the Gulf. And of course, the main drivers are seawater temperature, sea level rise, and increase in salinity. Dissolved oxygen dissolved in the water will change, and obviously ocean acidity will affect the carbonate chemistry. But we mustn't forget the things that Case also mentioned about, the impacts on extreme weather events. So that includes cyclones, but also the strength of the Shamal and the associated dust events. So as a result, it's expected that there will be at least 10% of the total fish community will become extinct in the Gulf. We've already experienced and witnessed a rapid decline in coral communities, but some of the more subtle effects are a potential increase in harmful algal blooms and also jellyfish blooms, which will interact with coastal infrastructure, particularly aquaculture, fisheries, but also industrial seawater intakes. It's likely that there'll be a decline in phytoplankton productivity, so that will affect the productivity of fisheries, for example. Mangroves and seagrass are likely to be affected, and of course, marine wildlife and various bird species will be affected. So this policy document and analysis has already identified some important knowledge gaps, which Case, I'm sure, is aware of, need to be addressed through a research program and further work. Next slide, please. So in terms of what the kind of mitigation and resilience measures need to be, well, obviously, further research is necessary, particularly an approach that's been adopted effectively from the US called enhanced or accelerated adaptation, where survivors of bleaching events are taken into the lab, selectively bred from for those resilience traits, and then returned back into the environment so that they can hopefully repopulate the community that's affected. The similar sort of principles could be applied to seagrass and mangroves, but this is still at research and development level. So that's kind of technology readiness levels of 1 to 3. Other important approaches that need to be really focused on are scalable restoration techniques. And a lot of these are being developed in other parts of the world. So technology transfer from, for example, Australia, which really leads the way on coral reef management, but also in the US and Bahamas. They are at the cutting edge. And this particular picture is of a coral that was raised in the laboratory and is spawning here, so that those larvae that are raised in the lab could be returned to the reef and populate the reef again. So again, it's a very interesting scalable technology, and that work was done at Zayed University in Abu Dhabi. Another, and I'll finish on this point, key aspect of policy in the region must be to protect the most resilient habitats. And in particular, those areas offshore, around offshore islands, where the water is a little bit deeper, and obviously they're free from some of the coastal impacts arising from coastal developments in the area. But not forgetting areas where tidal flow is stronger, because that is one way that corals can use their environment or survive in an environment where there's greater flow, and that helps ameliorate the effects of increased temperatures. So it's not just the islands, but also potentially some of the offshore infrastructure, particularly the offshore oil and gas sector, which in principle serve as ad hoc marine protected areas, in the sense that there is no fishing zone that is normally established around these areas. But also during the decommissioning cycle, one needs to consider the feasibility and benefits of keeping some of that infrastructure in the marine environment, and so that they can serve as essentially artificial reefs, and particularly if there is a management regime around them that limits fishing, so that they can develop, and the fish communities in those areas can develop and then spill over into surrounding areas. So there are just a few sort of ideas that would help enhance the ecological system and the resilience of the system in the Gulf in the face of climate change. So with that, Robin, I'll hand back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simon. This is very valuable information. I'll let people applaud for you.
Thank you.
So our next speaker will be Dr. Monica Altiminaro, it's my colleague, specialist in public-private partnerships at Deltares and advisor to the Netherlands Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management. She'll be talking about the financial side of these type of ideas. And she is a PPP specialist and a system thinker. She works on climate and water finance. So she is a climate and water finance thought leader. And she has 18 years of experience in the public-private partnerships. And she's a multidisciplinary leader who has advised governments on how to catalyze private sector investments in infrastructure, water, and climate adaptation around the world. She applies the economics of infrastructure, provisioning, and systems engineering to facilitate complex multi-party financing. And Monica is committed to make water security and adaptation to climate change financially feasible for developing countries. So welcome, Monica. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll give the floor to you.
Thank you, Ahmed. It's a real honor to be here with you virtually. Today, as Robin was telling you, I want to present to you how do we go now from the idea that we want more and more nature-based solutions implemented at scale to get them to be investable propositions. I can't, Robin, I can see the, okay, that's now slide? Perfect. Okay. I can see the slide. Yes, yeah. yes. So with that, basically, what I will present today to you is also something that we have been working the last at least 5 years as Institute, and is ongoing, basically, like I said, from idea to proposition. At this moment, I can see the slide, Robin. I don't know if...
It's on the next slide now, Monica. Can you see it, or...?
Oh, now, yeah, but I don't know, for some reason, there are moments that it stopped projecting, so...
Okay.
Yes, now I will try it 1 second, because that's... Okay, I think now it should be fine. I have pinned this one. So basically, yes, I mean, when we look at nature-based solutions, I think worldwide we're now convinced that that's an important element of a new way of keep growing and keep our economies also safe, no, from the increasing variability in climate and so forth. But there are still like a number of bottlenecks, no? So together with a large team, we have been working basically in 3 major bottlenecks. And the first one is, I mean, in a changing climate, how can we know that these investments are future-proof, right? How do we know that what we're investing today, given that nature-based solutions in a way help to systemic resilience, but they are also vulnerable themselves? How do we make those investments future-proof? And for that, we have been applying a risk-based asset management approach to them. The second is, of course, how do we create demand at the watershed scales that we can implement them also at that system scale? And for that, it's quite crucial to go and work in a number of governance structures that will enable collective investment, will enable private sector also to invest on them with lower transaction costs than right now. And the third, but equally important, is how do we make sure we have enough trustworthy suppliers, right? So that there is a real working market, not just at demand, but also suppliers. And for that, we have been, for example, working with the coalition of private investors in conservation to create a blueprint for the development of those type of markets. All of this work, we have in this work also worked with 23 partners, for example, across Europe within the European project called Nature Insurance Value Assessment and Demonstration, and is presented in the handbook for the implementation of nature-based solutions for water security. But as you can imagine, and we can go to the next slide, Robin, as you can imagine, to do this work requires a variety of disciplines. And I think that's something that we have great at Deltares, that we have a great variety of experts that cover what is called now from source to sea, right? The entire water cycle. And what we have been trying by working together, that we're all women is just a coincidence because the rates in Deltares are not that, let's say we have maybe like 70-30, not 50-50 yet of experts, but still what we have tried is with a multidisciplinary team, go looking at those gaps. And also maybe here important to say is that when we look at finance, right, as it was said last week, for example, in the OECD Roundtable on Water Financing, finance is an outcome, right? It's not, let's say, the last part of the process of planning. And if some of you are there from the Netherlands, we have this part of the bread, for example, that you put at the end, right? Hagelslag. And I always talk with my colleagues and say, well, you know what? Finance is not that, it's the way we do the bread so that somebody else wants to go further, right, with those projects. And so we're trying to blend our technical expertise with project preparation skills, working with partners so that we can go further in innovating in the way we do planning. And so in a way, going from these great technically viable master plans, right, to something that is also implementable, for which we have private sector appetite. And that's where what I will show you today is how we do this, right? How we do this, how we have been innovating and demonstrating a new way of planning for water security and resilience. We can go to the next slide. So one of the elements we have been working on and developing is the financing framework for water security. And that's like, you could see like an interface, right? Between the project delivery and finance community that normally comes at the end of the planning process, and the water resources planning and watershed conservation communities, creating a common language in which they can discuss, first of all, taking into account the type of nature-based solutions you want to implement, the technical and financial characteristics of that transaction. They're defining together, with stakeholders, the level of service you want to achieve with them, because I think the expectations have to be quite clear and upfront discussed. And then based also in the institutional setting that you will come to a fit for purpose implementation arrangement. So basically, this financing framework for water security that you can find in the handbook and that we continue to apply now, for example, in 2 Green Deal projects in Europe and outside Europe too, it's a way to guide that inquiry together with the different disciplines and with the stakeholders. We can go to the next one. And I hope you don't get overwhelmed by this graph. That's not the idea, but the idea is basically to say, if we want to implement nature-based solutions at system scale, if we want to build a strong business case for them, the complete business case, we have seen that you need to do 2 major steps. And one is to zoom out, right? Because we're all convinced. And when we come together, sometimes in water sector meetings, maybe we're preaching to the converted. But when we go out there and we want to make this part of the larger economic planning of a region, and not just like a side project, we need to zoom out and strengthen the strategic and economic business case of these solutions. For example, here you see an example from Semarang, where we have worked in the water as leverage for resilient cities in Asia. In this case, this is the phone in Indonesia. And then you see if we can show how ecosystems and how a new way of developing using nature-based solutions is a big enabler of a paradigm shift, right? In the city here, you see 3 cycles, right? In that city of Semarang to the left, that's how the situation is now. You're canalizing the city more and more to get the water the faster as possible when it rains to the sea, but at the same time, you're depleting your groundwater resources. And these all create subsidence of the city, by which you get more and more flooded. People go upstream. They develop in a way that the water it becomes less spongy, therefore floods become worse. And at the end of the day, you have to show that city also that this is hurting the tax base, right? And in this way, the development of the city cannot continue in a sustainable way. So then we work with spatial planners, with hydrologists, with the stakeholders to to different 5 typologies of development that would make sure that they can develop and they kind of, in a way, are climate positive because they are recovering those groundwater reserves and they can continue. So this is the base. I mean, to show also, if you want to be climate positive, there is no way you can show to the new regulations that you're climate positive at system level if you don't zoom out, right? And by having this, you have the best base to go to a blended finance strategy when you can mix water, for example, SDG 6 finance or disaster risk reduction, but also SDG 8, that is economic growth financial means. We can go to the next one. When you have that, a clear narrative why your investments in nature-based solutions and climate positive developments fit this, the economic development vision of the region, it is time though to zoom in, right? Because these great ideas, for money to flow to grow great ideas, we have to go to the nitty-gritty details of the contracting and who are those contracting parties. And that is where what we are working is to say, let's not end in a plan that is like 100 measures that have not a clear owner, but we have to work in clustering this, in making clear clusters that are for the first 5, then 10, then 15 years, that together, like measure 1, 2, or 3, could be a combination of a nature-based solutions with a structural solution and a more like technology-oriented, like an early warning systems, how those together ensure a certain functions, and then go further to decide which are those users and which are those services that you are delivering and how this investment will make a difference in the level of service they require. So say people, for example, in the water and sanitation space, it's really clear if people had like 4 hours per day access to that, do we want them to have it 24/7, right? So that's how we want to measure the difference in the level of service. When we have that, then we can see how we capture all that value. And along that process, it's also good to see what are the risks in the life cycle of these investments that you will face, and think already in mitigation measures, because that will be very crucial to have the complete cash flow profile of the project and the risk profile of it. We can go to the next. And so these are the basic steps and building blocks of this process, in which we will see, I mean, if you have categorized the top 3 services you will give and have a clear hierarchy for which top 1 are you designing that nature-based solutions and so forth. And you will decide whether that service in that particular context could be considered a public good, or it could be charged for and become a private or club good. And in general, you know that when it's a complete public good in which we can't exclude people from using and so forth, then you will have to probably use some kind of taxes to fund that. But if you can create basically a way and to make it a club good or a private good, then you could start to charge tariffs for those. In most of these projects, though, you will be solving externalities created in other parts of the world, and therefore you could also apply and make use of climate finance, right? That's the whole point of climate funds, to help countries leapfrog from where they are to a new way of developing and solving those world created externalities. And only once you have those 2 things, you will be able to pay for that in the long term through taxes, tariff, or transfers. We can go then to say what will be the financing strategy, and we have been inventorizing all kind of models, like mitigation banking or blue bonds, climate bonds, that are suitable for this type of nature-based solutions for water security and climate adaptation projects. And if in the very last stage, though it will be a very important instrument, is how do you put those projects in the market? And then you have to decide, depending on the maturity and experience you have locally, whether you go for very integrated performance-based context, or you start step by step by a design build and then operation and maintain for some years. And in the next phase of projects, you do a completely integrated PPP project. What we have what we have been looking here at also is that there are like 4 families, you could say, of implementation arrangements that then you still have to fine tune and decide the specific clauses in the contract to make it possible. Then the next one, Robin, I can't see what. Let me see. It's
now on,
is the
Monica.
one with the QR code? Okay, then I know. Oh, yes, that's right. I have to get used to these hybrid meetings. I must say, I had yesterday the first one. Yeah, so there are like four types, you could say. No, once you have decided which nature-based solutions you will implement, I think a big part of them will be still through public project procurement, which can take, like I said, different forms, very integrated PPP type, or much more traditional design bid build, for example. Because still a lot of these investments like fraud protection and so forth are a public good. You can expect public procurement has a big role to play, and can also have a very catalytic role to play, right? Because that's how you can make something very risky, like nature-based solutions, slowly less risky, and create a whole set of trustworthy suppliers. The second, happening a lot in especially in developing countries and Latin America, where I'm actually originally from, is water stewardship. No, private companies who decide to make an investment in that watershed. But normally these are voluntary investments and a smaller scale, so this wouldn't solve the whole problem. You can also have collective investment schemes like the water funds, in which a variety of these possibly public and private companies operating in that watershed set a scheme and a governance way to decide together in what to invest every 5 years. And finally, but actually still quite important and with a high potential, are environmental or ecosystem markets, like we see in US, for example, with the mitigation market, or like we see in some cities with water storm markets, in which you really create the regulation, the economic regulation context, so that people will be driven to invest in nature-based solutions. To finalize, I mean, we have to consider the next one, please. Is that we are in an evolving financial architecture. I think every day there are news about a new standard being developed. No, environmental, social, and governance risk and impact investing was shifted actually thanks to COVID to not like a hobby for investors, but a main piece of the investment sector. We have a development in development finance of blended finance. We want to use concession of funding and development cooperation money just in a catalytic way to get the creation of new markets to happen, for example, for nature-based solutions. And everybody is also pushing for output-based aid, right? Because in that way, you're really making sure that after you do that investment in the short term, in the long term, that will continue. But these changes every day, they're not yet aligned. Still, if you have a process of planning and a project origination process that is very clear, that it has this system view first, and then zoom into the very clear agreements about who carries which risk and benefits, you probably will be able to withstand all these different standards being introduced. But basically, like in a meeting we had yesterday, we don't like this complexity, but in this next decade of uncertainty, there is no way we will find finance for our projects if we don't deal with that complexity early in the process. With that, I would like to finish. Robin, you can go to the last one, and then you can see also some contact details from our team, but also follow the work we're doing with, for example, closing the implementation gap hashtag. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monica. Much appreciated, and a very interesting other aspect that we need to look at, obviously. Also, to keep speed going, I would like to introduce Mrs. Huda Dubusi, Vice President of Acquisitions, Divestments and New Business Development for Renewable Energy Solutions for Shell globally. And Huda has recently transitioned into leading the acquisitions, divestments and new business development for renewables energy solutions for Shell globally. And the new organization under her leadership will be responsible to deliver the inorganic growth and portfolio management for Shell's clean energy portfolio across renewables such as wind and solar, new mobility options such as electric vehicle charging and hydrogen, nature-based solutions, and an interconnected power business that will provide electricity to millions of homes, companies, and businesses. Next to that, Huda supports entrepreneurship through mentoring entrepreneurs and being an angel investor. And she has a keen interest in education and supports youth through NGOs in and outside of her home country of Lebanon. So Huda, with that slightly long introduction, please.
Thank you. So thank you for inviting me here. As you can hear, I'm not an expert per se on this topic, but it's very important to represent Shell, and I'll talk over the next 7 minutes about why it's so important. Shell, as you all know, is an Anglo-Dutch company with more than 80 years history in the UAE, so it's a privilege and really great to be here. And I think Expo 2020 is particularly a celebration of humanity's achievements and humanity's ability to really shape the future to the better with knowledge and collaboration. And those themes are not only important in the context and resonate very well with Shell's mission to power progress together, but also for this topic today. Collaboration is really key if we were to be able to deliver on climate change and biodiversity goals that we need to achieve. Shell has a target to be net zero emissions as an energy company by 2050. And this means that we have a goal to power progress with preserving nature and respecting nature. And respecting nature is a pillar in terms of delivering that goal. And as you heard from my intro, we are investing heavily in solar and wind. And although investing in renewables actually help and is key to achieving the Paris Agreement, they can have a negative effect on the ecosystem if not planned appropriately. And today we are going to talk about the marine environment, so I'm going to focus my comments on our wind development. And we approximately have 60 gigawatts of developments in offshore wind. And our projects range from bottom-fixed wind development to more innovative floating technology, and all the way from offshore wind to hydrogen, for example, in the Netherlands. As we develop these projects, we proactively consider the impact coming from construction noise, from turbine height, and from disturbance, seabed disturbance on birds, on marine mammals, and on fisheries, and also what happens at the end of life when we decommission. And I think this is step number one is, we have decided to take a proactive approach to how we solve these challenges. And this is, I think, step number one in the ecosystem of how the collaboration would work. And how we do this while preserving nature and driving circularity and innovation in this space so we can focus on positive contribution to biodiversity and habitats. And that cannot happen. It's too big and too urgent of a goal to happen with one party. It really involves collaboration sector by sector between Shell, its customers, its suppliers, its partners, but also regulators and governments and the wider society for all of this to be a success. So I'm going to talk about 3 levels of this collaboration. The first one is around the global level. And for example, we as Shell, with other energy companies, are working with the International Union for the Conservation of Nature to develop detailed guidelines on how companies can do more to protect biodiversity when they develop wind and solar projects. For example, another important progress is around the upcoming UN Convention on biological diversity, COP15, that is happening in China. This is a key milestone for governments to strengthen the global biodiversity framework and further drive business action on nature. And then I will move to local governments, because there are the global initiatives. There's also what can be done locally, but also regionally. We are today in the Netherlands Pavilion. I'll give an example about how the Netherlands is actually leading the way by putting in place a marine spatial plan to ensure targets for biodiversity and clean energy development are actually delivered. This, in our view, is an integrated approach to help with marine planning and is key to strengthen the collaboration across, with society, business, government, across specific offshore developments, such as the North Sea for the Netherlands. And then we move from, the global, local, and regional to the project level, and how private sector and companies and business can also look at this with an angle to deliver those goals. At the project level, it's really key for us to screen, and I think some of our previous speakers talked about this, to screen for biodiversity risks at the planning level, and to speak and listen to the local communities at the project as the project develops. And then, for example, we have a project in the Shell Atlantic Shores. It's a joint venture in the USA, and we are working with scientists to track threatened red-knot birds to understand where the birds are flying and at what altitude. And we're experimenting with aerial and subwater drones to track marine wildlife, including sea turtles and whales. We recognize that there's also another way and an opportunity to actively restore and enhance biodiversity, and I think we heard a lot about it today. I'll again use another Dutch example, Dutch North Sea. In the 19th century, about 30% of the Dutch North Sea was shellfish reef. Before, overfishing meant largely this has disappeared today. Bowwind, a project that we are involved in, is now working with marine biologists to reintroduce oyster beds on the base of the wind turbines. And we are hopeful we can create a new nursery for new marine whilst helping decarbonize the Netherlands power supply. To sum it up, and I leave you with really one thought, and why I'm really thrilled to be part of this dialogue, is collaboration is essential. Great goals happen when everyone comes together to deliver them. I've heard today enough innovative ideas and expertise that drive dialogue that will help us feel comfortable and confident that actually together we can do this. I want to leave you with this thought that Shell is really committed to playing its part. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Huda, for this inspiring speech, and good to hear that we can count on Shell also to work with us together and solving these typical questions. I would like to go to our last inspirational speaker, which is Erik van Eckeler, who is a department manager at Van Oort, and he's working worldwide on a full range of environmental aspects of projects at Van Oort. For example, such as building with nature, stakeholder engagement, protection of marine fauna, and turbidity monitoring and management. And currently he's manager of that environmental department. For Van Oort, he was also part of the management team of the Building with Nature 2 program of the EcoShape consortium that he'll be discussing about as well. And that develops knowledge on the topic of building with nature. And after developing various pilot projects, he later focused on the program output and being the editor of the book Building with Nature, Creating, Implementing, and Upscaling Nature-Based Solutions. So with that, Erik, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Robin. Thank you very much. Many thanks for having me here. And I think it's already been mentioned, and as you can see it on the slide as well. There is a global trend that say nature-based solutions in marine infrastructure development will be the key to help us forward out of the problems of climate adaptation and biodiversity. They had to counter biodiversity decline. And as you can see here, for many sides of the world, there's been attention to these nature-based solutions and into developing them. But if we see next, implementation, next slide, yeah? Implementation and upscaling is still seriously challenging. And we as EcoShape, we have been investigating why that actually is the case. And our conclusion is, next slide, that nature-based solutions, they are really different. And that's because they are dynamic by themselves. They include natural dynamics as part of the solution, which is rather different than for traditional infrastructure, which is rather static by nature. Nature-based solutions are multifunctional in itself. They combine the functions of nature, but also the function where it's made for, so being a harbor or being a flood defense, but it combines that with nature functions, with recreational functions, with part of being a landscape element. So that multifunctional aspect is always inherently part of nature-based solutions. Well, to combine all of that, using this dynamism, including this multifunctionality, is also innovative. It's therefore a new step to be taken, new terrains to be invented, and sort of experimenting or piloting is necessary for that. And then finally, it's context specific. You can't copy a nature-based solution that's working very well within one setting directly to another setting. And that's actually quite difficult, where, for instance, a perfect design for a quay wall could be used from the one harbor to the other harbor. A perfectly designed nature-based solutions, being a mangrove forest or being a dune system, can't be copied just as simple by that. So basically, if we want to apply nature-based solutions in our project, if we want to apply nature-based infrastructure, we need to really think, act, and interact differently. And I really like to show you that with two examples. First example, next slide, is in the Netherlands. It's the Hondsbossen and Pettermer Sea Defense, which was one of the last hard defense structures that was lying in the coast of the Netherlands. And this dike, although it looks very strong and nice on this picture with also this sheet pile wall in it, actually it didn't fulfill the safety standards of the Dutch coast anymore. And we were looking to strengthen it. Well, how to strengthen such a structure? Do we need additional rock on this? Do we need more asphalt, more concrete? But what is, so the issue is that a hard structure cannot cope with the sea level rise. And then if we would do a building with nature approach, if we want to go with that nature-based solution, you have to ask the main question, what is actually the system? And then the system of the coast in the Netherlands is actually not made fully out of dike. Actually, the coastal system of the Netherlands, so our southern to northern coast, well, is actually a sandy dune beach system. So the nature-based solution to strengthen this dike is actually not to place more concrete, hard, bigger blocks, more rock or asphalt on top of that. Now, the nature-based solution would be to make a dune out of this. And that's what we did. Next slide, please. Oh, I think we are. So this is the structure again. And then next slide, that's the nature-based solution. So we actually constructed a dune in front of this dike, and here you see the process going. How we are placing all of this sand in front of this dike, so that we now have a soft, flexible, and a natural solution. And then typically nature-based solution. If we look on the next slide, here you can see that this also creates opportunities for recreational spaces. Here in front you see a lagoon, and actually that lagoon is connected to the sea, but of course because it's protected, this is a perfect place for small children to play and swim in the water. So there is a lot of recreational infrastructure developed as well. And so you really see this multi-dimensional aspect taking shape. We are taking a different stance. We're looking to the system to make our design, and then we create all these opportunities for multifunctionality. So next slide. So this is really what I wanted to explain about thinking and acting differently. It's taking a different way of designing such a solution, by which we used actually the building with nature design process. And the first and important point next is to understand the system. And so systems understanding is the starting point of any nature-based solution that is to be developed. Okay, so that is highlighted one. I want to take another example to highlight a couple of more elements of what we mean that you need to think, act, and interact differently if you want to develop nature-based solutions. Next slide. Taking a more rocky example this time. Unfortunately, it's again in the Netherlands. I would actually have hoped to have an international example here, but actually this Dutch example states it best. Here we are wanted to strengthen the foreshore of the dike. That's basically the underwater side of the dike, because actually that was here under collapse. And then, well, directly after it was presented that this project was going to take place, there were a lot of protesters against this solution. And the main reason that they were against it is that they foresaw that the landscape that was going to be created when the foreshore of the dike was going to be strengthened would look like the picture in the bottom left. Yeah. So again, we try to use, next slide, we try to use this building with nature vision, this nature-based idea. And then we really had to see, okay, so a traditional hard strengthening of that foreshore would indeed lead a one straight flat slope from say from the toe of the dike to the bottom of the gully. And that's because, of course, this system is an estuary. And in these estuaries, these gullies, they are actually quite deep, and the tidal flows go through there. So you have to this foreshore. Well, is a sort of a poor thing. But how could we create an opportunity to create that additional value, to create an interesting site for these people that were protesting? Because they were mainly divers, they were people that were ecologists that were looking after the particular species that are there. And what we wanted to create variation in the habitats. And the way that we did that in this system is, next slide, to create a cross structure in which the flow would be one of the parts, it would be flowing from the one side to the other. You would have an exposed side and you would have a sheltered side, but also on the top and the bottom you would have these sides as well. So with actually limited amount of rock, this cross structure has actually quite limited amount of rock, you would already create a lot of micro habitats. And so you would create a lot of opportunities. And of course, next slide, we then wanted to further design this solution, because what we wanted to create is an interesting landscape, so that this diving site that was created, that we had really interesting features, so big structures, these crosses, by the way, they are 25 by 25 meters in width, and they are about 5 meters high, and we have really placed a lot of a variety of these shapes so that it is really interested. And at the same time, we've optimized these structures to fit the locally interesting species, which were in this case the sepias and the lobster. And so, for instance, the grading of the rocks, I did it myself. I designed this particular to make sure that the cavities that are created would really fit, say, a decent-sized lobster as they are known in the Eastern Scheldt in this region. And so we worked this out, we worked this landscape out, we had this 3D impression, as you see on the top right. Well, luckily we got everyone convinced that we were actually allowed to build it. So in the bottom you see how we have actually delivered this site. And that, of course, created some positive attention. Next slide. So you really see that these people that were protesting and these people that were unhappy with the first solution, that they actually were quite happy with the landscape that we've created. And we also built an extra staircase for the divers to enter the water, and they were all very happy to join us in a typical Dutch weather day, a lot of rain, but everyone was still happy to join us in opening this, and we actually got quite a lot of media attention. But the proof of the pudding came in the eating. Next slide. That 5 years after we have done all of this work and we've made this construction, and basically this area was a construction site, the Underwater Photography World Championship came to the Netherlands and actually chose the exact site that we just mentioned as the location for the finals. And then the winning photo in this championship next was actually the lobster in this landscape. So typically the species that we have designed this for were really there. And I think this sort of showed that, say, when you get into contact with the stakeholders and you really find out what is the main issues and the main concerns, there are technical means to look into that. But the main thing that's there, and it's not only about the design, it's actually about a lot more. Next slide. And that's what we have learned. You have to look to various types of enablers for these nature-based solutions. So we've talked about technology, system understanding, designs, etc. But I think this example also highlights the need for multi-stakeholders. Your multifunctional infrastructure, so you need multiple stakeholders that address that. Requires a different way of managing, monitoring, and maintaining infrastructure. It must fit institutional embedding. It must also, the business case is actually quite different. Now, Monica just talked about this. And of course, it's necessary for people also to understand what is happening. Why are we creating what we are creating? Why are we making these design amendments? So capacity building is key for nature-based solutions as well. And as stated, as EcoShape, we have tried to really develop that further. Next slide. And in the Building with Nature 2 program that has run from 2014 till the end of last year, we've actually hoped to that we have delivered actually quite a lot of inspiration to be dealing with that. So we have a pilot portfolio next to the examples that I've showed. There are many other examples also in other settings, muddy systems, mangroves, reefs. So this portfolio is there. It's gathered on our website ecoshape.org, and that not only provides the examples, but it also tries to provide inspiration and guidance into how you can implement this in your system, because you can't copy paste the examples that I've just shown. But the idea and the philosophy about how to take this up is really there. There's this book that I just present that's here on the slide. I'm one of the co-editors of that. It's actually also provides that storyline. It provides for 6 different types of landscape. It provides opportunities and ideas on what type of concepts can be applied. And next to that, it discusses with a lot of roundtables with various people, also in the room today, about what can be done. How do you really get this process on the roll? And on the same topic, we also as EcoShape have delivered some white papers to really take position, to accelerate the discussion like we are doing today. And also EcoShape is there as a network to provide you with partnerships. So I hope with this inspirational speech, I have shown you two major things. So nature-based solutions. I think there is a sort of a conclusive agreement that they might be the way forward to deal with climate adaptation and all the issues around biodiversity declines that we are facing at the moment. So they are really the step forward, but that it really is necessary to work on all of these 6 enablers. It's not only technology and system knowledge, it's also about stakeholders, about a way to maintain, monitor, and manage these type of infrastructures, a different type of business case, and fitting in the institutional setting and capacity building. That's what's necessary to upscale nature-based solutions. Thank you very much for having me here for this talk.
Thank you very much, Eric, and that I think is a brilliant summary of where we stand right now, and I think it's also very inspiring to see that we already made big steps before that we can build upon, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's time to move into our panel discussion. So I would like to invite our Dr. Alice Penning, who will be moderating that session, and she's an expert in the field of nature-based solutions and hydraulic research for over 20 years already. She leads the Deltares strategic program on nature-based solutions, and she carries out a variety of projects related to this topic, both nationally and internationally. So with that,
thank you very much, Robin. Good morning, everybody. I would like to welcome all of our speakers to the floor, and we would also have Henk, who has been on the screen already, to be also shown on the screen. So if I can start with Omar Sharif, please come forward. Omar is a cross-functional sustainability official. He has over 8 years of experience in research, consultancy, and government, and he's currently the manager of the WSP's advisory services. So he's focusing on smart and sustainable and resilient communities. And prior to that, he was the regional economic advisor for the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where he supported Dutch water energy and agri-tech. Welcome very much. Thank you very much. I would also like to welcome Deepti. Henk is already on the screen now. Good to see you, Henk. Deepti Maharya Mittal, she's a senior policy specialist in climate change at the UAE Ministry of Climate Change and Environment. She's engaged in the design and implementation of the UAE's federal climate plans and develops the international commitments to a UN framework for the Convention on Climate Change. She's also a member of the UAE Climate Negotiations Committee, and she has been working before at WWF, working on similar topics. Next to that, in our team of panel discussions, we have Professor Mohammed Dawood. Please come forward as well. He is a professor at the National Water Research Center and currently also a water resource advisor for the Environment Agency at Abu Dhabi. And since 1991, he has been maintaining an active program of research and consultancy activities with particular emphasis on the groundwater aquifers and artificial recharge of these with desalinated water to reuse of TSE and desalination technologies and water resources management. Very welcome to you as well. And then we have our other speaker. I'll just move to the other side. There's a lot of CVs here. I would like to also warmly welcome Professor Shuit Nepal. He is from Suriname, the Anton de Kort University, and he's a geographer specialized in hydrology and in other water-related fields. He has good knowledge about the hydrology of swamps, lagoons, and wetlands, mangroves in the coastal area, and since 2010 he's actively involved in rehabilitation of mangrove ecosystems using building with nature concept, as was also explained by Eric before. So it's really welcome to all of you, my panelists. We have about 3/4 of an hour to discuss and reflect on all of the speeches that you've just heard before. So I'd like to start with Henk. Henk, when you've been listening to all of these speeches and your own one as well, can you just briefly summarize what attracts you most in the concept of climate positive marine development? Just very briefly, just to remind us all. Just 1 minute, more than you.
Thanks so much, Alice, and great to see an amazing panel, but also the very inspirational speeches. It's very hard to sum it all up, but I think what we saw is that every one of the presenters, but that is also what we face in practice, is that they all say, okay, it's complex. We see interdependencies across economic, environmental, social, but also cultural aspects of the environment, of our economy. And we have to look at it in an integrated, holistic way. So that is one. Second, everybody is saying, you can't do this alone. Not in your silo. We have to work together. It has to be collaborative. So partnerships, coalitions, but also forging those coalitions institutionally as well as informal, of critical importance. And third, looking at the long term. Quick fixes, band-aid approaches that only bring us from today to tomorrow won't get us to a more sustainable future. This is really about the long haul, so a sustainable effort towards that future. I think those are three critical aspects. The other part was we need innovation. The aspects of those collaborations that really can help catalyze springboards that really jump to that future. And I think I referenced in my speech the Climate Change and Land report by the IPCC. It makes very clear that 99% of our investments worldwide go to infrastructure that makes us more vulnerable and increases climate change. Only 1%, even less, goes to the stuff we've been talking about. And we are very inspired, and it's amazing. But scaling up that 1% to 5, 25, and then the majority is going to be of critical importance. And I think each and every one of the the speakers, their innovators, with their ideas, will have that opportunity. And then last, next to these 2 points, it is about capacity. Because if we want to move from 1% to a majority to become more sustainable and climate active, it is about capacity among professionals, individuals, informal, but definitely also in our institutions, to counter vested interest and to progress to a more sustainable future.
Thank you very much,
Thank you.
We'll go to Omar. Can you tell me, also from your perspective, working as a consultant, on how you see these climate-positive marine developments?
Yeah, sure, thank you. And just thank you for the invitation. Very great to be here at the Netherlands Pavilion, really fantastic. Maybe I can start by going back 10 years to the region here. I'll just share a very quick, maybe anecdote, and that's relating to how sustainability was approached here in the Gulf region. I've been a consultant in the region for the past 8 or so years, and what we really witnessed is that there was a lot of awareness raising that was required in the early stages. So as consultants working in the private sector, really pushing our clients to identify sustainability opportunities, and not just as a standalone project, but really something that's integrated into their design philosophy, into their actual corporate ethics. That was something that took quite a bit of an initiative, but it's fantastic when you look at how far this region has come in the past 10 years. And maybe one thing that I can mention is that quite early on in most companies here, energy intensive and otherwise, they often had their sustainability departments or individuals within the communication departments because they saw it as a communications issue. And we've come a long way since then. Now you find that it's much more of a strategic issue. It's looked at much more importantly. And I think quite similarly, we're seeing the same thing with climate resilience or climate adaptation and mitigation, where in the past it wasn't really even discussed or wasn't on people's agendas here in the region. But now it's becoming more and more requested by clients as well that, hey, we have a bunch of risks that we're identifying for a project, and amongst them we would also like you to support us with the climate hazards and risks. And that's something that's quite new, and I think that'll really accelerate in the coming decade or so. Yeah, thank you.
I also see you nodding, agreeing with it. Can you reflect on that as well, please? Yeah, I think so. Try. Can you put on the microphone?
I think this one isn't working.
Oh, you
okay.
said.
Oops. We can share. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for having me here. It's a pleasure. It's been very inspiring to hear everything that's been said since the morning. I think, climate positive marine developments, to my mind, kind of highlights 3 sort of key things. The first, of course, is that it allows us to take cognizance of the climate risks that marine developments themselves are going to face. We know that some of the climate impacts that we are seeing today, changes in precipitation, storm surges, sea level rise, they're here to stay. And if we want to build resilient, sustainable infrastructure, we need to be taking these into account. I think the second tier that it sort of highlights is the other side of the causal relationship, which is that marine developments also have impacts on climate. And there are direct impacts in terms of emissions from construction and development and operation. And there are also indirect impacts in terms of the impacts on ecosystems, on species and habitats, on ocean properties themselves in terms of the pH and the sea surface temperatures. And these have cyclical impacts on the climate as well. So I think it is that side of that causal dynamic that's sort of highlighted as well. And the third thing, which I think is perhaps the most important and the most relevant in the context of the discussion that we are having today, is that climate positive developments make us think about the fact that we can actually have marine projects, we can actually create value in our oceans while creating net positive impact on climate. And I think if we want to operationalize this net positive impact, we need to be asking ourselves the right questions when we're developing these projects. We need to be asking ourselves, what can marine projects do to build in a regenerative, circular sort of business model within their operation. What can marine projects do to enhance ecosystems? What can they do to rehabilitate and restore degraded ecosystems? And what can they do to create value and create adaptation and resilience benefits for communities, for island communities, for coastal communities? So I think that's perhaps one of the most interesting sort of aspects that has stood out today. And before I kind of finish, I just wanted to also highlight that this whole notion of climate positive marine development fits in very well with the whole idea of a sustainable blue economy. And since the morning, I haven't heard that much about it, but I think we do need to kind of see how all of this fits together, because the sustainable blue economy is also being used a lot in terms of how to finance projects. And we know that this fits in very well. We know that the ocean economy is going to be and continues to be a huge part of economic development. In fact, according to one assessment, and this is a slightly older one, so perhaps there are updates available as well, that the total value of ocean assets stands at over $24 trillion. And it said also that if the ocean was actually a country, it would be the 7th largest economy in the world, right? So that just explains the scale of opportunity that's available, but not just to make money, but also to really bring environmental and climate action to the foreground when we're thinking about economic development.
Thank you very much. Very, very nice to make that link with the blue economy. And perhaps our next speaker, can you also explain the link, for example, with all of the efforts that are being done in like desalinization techniques?
And I think at the beginning, if we have to understand the many challenges, the many challenges facing the marine ecosystem, either worldwide or even within our region and GCC countries. And I will elaborate a little bit on the GCC case study. Here, the marine environment having a lot of challenges. The first is that most of the cities, most of the developments are along the shoreline, and we have a huge and hundreds of projects, either hydrocarbon projects or domestic projects or rehabilitation projects. Even we have a lot of artificial islands and dredging every day within the marine ecosystem. Not this, but also the main freshwater resources within our region is coming through the desalination, which we have to desalinate the marine water and discharge it back to the marine environment, hundreds, thousands, or 100 millions tons every day of brine water, mixed or blended with the cooling water and discharge it back to the Gulf. I can give you just a very brief number. We are producing along the Arabian Gulf, the six GCC countries, about 4 billion cubic meter of desalinated water. And we have to discharge double of this volume every day or every year back to the marine environment. The circulation is very slow, and the only natural process to influence the circulation within the marine ecosystem in the Gulf is the evaporation and then dragging the water. The circulation will take something between 5 to 7 years of a drop of water to come from and to go out again from the Arabian Gulf. How many water or blast water is discharged back every day from the oil ships every day to the Gulf? What is the situation now of the marine salinity in the Gulf? It is more than 46,000 ppm compared with the open ocean, which is 32, 35 maximum. So we are having a lot of challenges. Meanwhile, it is playing, the marine ecosystem is playing a very important role, not only as economic, but also in the social activities. It is fully interlinked, not with only the shipping and oil production, but also with the food production, because the desalinated water is used for irrigation in some areas and for food production. So the marine ecosystem is very important for us to have, or to how we can change our situation or our Gulf or our ocean from a victim to a solution to reach the carbon or the carbon zero emissions or climate positive development in the future. It needs a huge planning. And from my point of view, we have, or this plan should be exist on or rely on 3 pillars. The first one is to reduce the discharge of treated wastewater to Gulf, reduce the brine water discharge to the Gulf, reduce the carbon emission from the desalination which exists on the Gulf, reduce the impact on the climate change to minimize the rise in the future. And also, in addition to the reduction, to offset the carbon, and the plantation of mangroves, plantation of the ecosystem forest to enhance the situation, diversify the energy consumption, to use the renewable energy, or even the marine. And I can speak about a lot of cases which we do have here in the Gulf, and a lot of case studies with figures maybe in the next session.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dr. Ali.
Professor Nepal, you're from Suriname, coming in a slightly different climatic environment, perhaps. Can you also reflect on what you've heard and perhaps also link it to what you are currently doing in the field as your work and how you see those opportunities also here for the region?
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me here also. Indeed, I've heard a lot, and I went over from presenting and doing speeches over to implementation. It's an entirely other world. It's a world of interdisciplinary sciences and linkages. You have to work with the locals. We have to understand how the biodiversity act. You have to understand the biophysics, everything to get finally the result of creation. We are talking about circulations. Suriname is located at the northeast coast of South America, just above the Amazon. We are getting a lot of sediments from the Amazon into the Atlantic Ocean, being transported to the west and deposited. But the sea level rise and climate change have tremendous negative impact on that. And if you don't take care now and find a solution, look to the new innovations, you might get lost because our coast is very flat and the mangrove will get lost too. Together with mangrove, we will lose everything, including food, including water, including the biodiversity. And that will bring us steps behind and back again. So in order not to happen that, you have to understand and try to get into this, how to solve this problem. And restoration is one, but also creation is the next thing. You have to create not only to protect or to conserve, because everything is already shared, everything is already divided. But what you have to create new, I think that will be for everybody. And we have to go that direction, and we're trying to understand the mechanisms. We have tried to understand the people. We are trying to understand the biodiversity, because also in the world of life, mangrove is needed. The leaf of mangroves is being absorbed by the crabs, by the fisheries, everything, and what we need back again. So this whole circulation we need to maintain and to promote further and to create further.
Thank you very much. It's also interesting that you speak about understanding the system, and it is the ecosystem, like the natural ecosystem, but in a way it's also the social ecosystem, right? And where you work together, and that's also one of the things that I think is important in that we cooperate in that. So I was also wanting to ask Henk how he sees that we can continue like developing these opportunities together. So what can we from the Netherlands learn from here in the region, but likewise also how can we contribute to developments over here if we're talking about climate positive developments?
I think, thanks again, and also to the presenters, and thanks Alice for the question. I think in many ways, the Dutch government is supporting our businesses, research institutes, academia, but also NGOs, and working around the world on these water, climate, sustainable related challenges. For that, we put programs out like Partners for Water, where we support that Dutch sector to not go by themselves, but to really make these linkages and these coalitions with foreign partners. Second, we have many bilateral opportunities where a government-to-government base, or at least a government-to-government foundation, helps to catalyze springboard business-to-business opportunities. We set up a new Invest International office where we support our sector in going around the world. And overarching this, or perhaps even as the foundation, is that 2015, now 6 years ago, was an important year where we agreed on a Sendai framework in the context of disaster risks, a finance agreement in Addis Ababa, the Sustainable Development Goals in New York, and the Paris Agreement on climate, and the year after in Quito, an urban agenda. 5 universal agreements where The Netherlands not only promised to make sure that in the Netherlands we run for climate change action and sustainable progress, but that we work out around the world, across the world, to reach out. Last, I spoke about the Climate Adaptation Summit that we hosted in the Netherlands, virtually, of course. But that adaptation agenda, we move forward to Glasgow and beyond, and towards that UN conference. And those pathways, those runways, you could say, we really want to use as springboards to catalyze public-private partnerships, innovations, and so forth from across the world. So count on us. We are here in this nexus of energy, water, and food, and from source to sea in these marine environments to make sure that these partnerships are not only one-offs, are not only on the short term, but really aim for longer-term commitments, coalitions that really can help drive the change.
Thank you. It's a really nice one to talk about these public-private partnerships, right? And I think it's a really important step. And perhaps can you also say somehow you see that public-private partnership as an opportunity for climate-positive development?
Yeah, certainly. I think the Gulf has a fantastic experience, I think, with PPP projects in general. We've seen them a lot in the power and water sector, especially in starting in the UAE, Qatar, and also other GCC countries have followed suit with that. We've also seen it expand into waste projects and many other ones as well. I think expanding into infrastructure and marine projects might be the next step, so to speak. And just as an interesting resource, I know that the Global Center on Adaptation, they very recently published a handbook on integrating climate resilience into PPP projects. So that's something that's quite interesting for all PPP practitioners globally and in the region. Besides that, what I would like to mention is that in the region, we've seen that there's a lot of projects that have been undergoing, especially greenfield projects, not just in power and water, but also in, I would say, in tourism. So right now there's a huge emphasis on projects that we see in Saudi Arabia, especially. We have the Red Sea project, we have NEOM. A lot of them have extensive marine-related work. And I think in order to really kickstart that public-private partnerships, it's really crucial that there's sufficient also awareness from the public sector. And I'm sorry to throw the ball at the public sector here, but I really do think it's critical that in order to have because a lot of these projects are often top-down in that they're prepared into quite extensive tenders that the private sector responds to. And oftentimes, as the private sector, as consultancies, as contractors, you do have a bit of influence, and that's really our role. And our role is to also raise awareness on what can be done, how can we do it, what are the approaches that can be taken, even from a financing point of view. But it's also on the public sector to ensure that that awareness is there and that these issues are integrated into the actual projects and especially the tenders. And that's where the role of having, I think, maybe training or awareness for some of the civil servants or in the departments that are preparing these tenders is really, really critical. If it's not there, then it's not going to be implemented by the private sector.
Yeah. No, it's also like one of these enablers, right? That Mr. Erik van Eckeler was showing. One of them is the capacity building. So I think it's a really good one, and I think it relates to all of us. The more that we know and the more that we are inspired, we can get new ideas. And so I was also wondering if you could say like how you see it from like the public perspective as well.
Right. So I think I'll build on what has already been said by my co-panelists, that yes, of course, we do need capacity building across stakeholders, but I also think that what is really needed is more dialogue between industry and government as well, because we also do need a little more knowledge creation and a sense of what are the challenges that industry is facing. So when we talk about climate positive marine developments, we tend to club up very many industries together, right? You could have infrastructure for telecom, like subsea cables. You have energy infrastructure, offshore wind, oil and gas, and you have infrastructure for shipping and ports and trading. So we're talking about very different kinds of industries together, and perhaps there needs to be a more specific kind of dialogue with industry as well to really understand where the challenges lie. And I think speaking of this region, there's already a lot happening. The government has been quite proactive about recognizing the assets that the ocean offers us. We have a national strategy for coastal and marine environment, and the specific purpose of that strategy is to really ensure that we are sustainably developing our ocean resources and that we are enabling economic development in the process. There's also a lot being done by the corporate sector, but I do think that we need to see all of the stakeholders step up and kind of engage in more dialogue and build capacity and ensure that we are really walking the talk.
Yeah, thank you. So also, coming back also to what you said before, Professor Hood, on making the ocean from a victim to a solution, right? And what kind of opportunities do you see for that specifically?
There is many opportunities. The first of this is developing new research and development to focus more on the initiatives and the programs that can enhance and reach the climate positive developments in the future. This could be including many, like the diversification of the energy resources to increase the use of clean energy in the future, even the ocean energy, or increasing the seaweed or the seaweed farming, increasing the areas cultivated with mangrove, minimizing the discharge of treated wastewater, decoupling of the desalination and the energy to minimize the discharge of brine water back to the Gulf, putting a comprehensive monitoring, assessment, and regulation and enforcement program to minimize the discharge of wastes to the Gulf and enhance the situation of the marine water or to even regulate the developments across the shoreline. And I can give you some figures here from UAE in general. First of all, we are starting now to float a tender for the first ever, I can say, or the first global full solar desalination plant with a capacity of 200 million imperial gallon a day with a total energy production of 45 mega.
Yeah, now, yeah, you were just, it's okay, it's going. Just speak a bit more into the microphone.
Right. Okay, sure.
I hope that Henk, you can hear what was being said. Is it okay? Yeah? Okay.
So we started now to float the tender, first ever tender for a full capacity solar based desalination plants with a total capacity of 200 million imperial gallon a day. The tender already floated and now it's under the tendering process, and it will also produce about 45 megawatts of electricity every day. Decoupling of the electricity and water will help us to use the innovative technology of desalination and minimize depending on the thermal oil technology and improve the efficiency and minimizing the discharge of brine water back to the Gulf, and also to offset a huge amount of carbon dioxide connected to the production of fresh water in the Gulf. It started now very ambitious plan to reach zero discharge of wastewater back to the Gulf. And by March 2021 in Abu Dhabi Emirate, 2 mega projects will be completed to reuse 390,000 cubic meters a day of wastewater, and we will reach zero discharge of wastewater back to the Gulf or the Arabian Gulf. In terms of the increasing of the mangrove area, I will give you a few figures here. In UAE in general, we have more than 30 million trees of mangrove. We have 13,000 hectares cultivated with mangrove. The increase in the area cultivated with mangrove between 2013 to 22 is 30%. 30% in 7 years, increasing the area cultivated to restore the carbon dioxide emissions and to work as a blue carbon initiative within the region. This could be restored or capture about 41 million tons of equivalent carbon dioxide every year, which is double of our oil and the gas sector emissions, double of this. We are reaching now to increase this in the future. All this initiative, including, and also what have been mentioned by my colleagues, in addition to the education, awareness campaigns, which we started recently, all this development can help us to improve our situation, and we can reach zero carbon in the future, or we can have what we call the climate positive developments in the future.
Yeah, thank you very much. Also for Professor Naipaul, what was already mentioned before is that the need for regulations and the need for institutional aspects. So if you talk about restoring mangroves, and what kind of opportunities do you see also taking it from that perspective?
This is a challenge indeed. First of all, indeed, you need capacity building, but to my mind, engagement is more strong needed. People has to be engaged. They're supposed to get also the feeling of the ownership. If the ownership is not there, situation may dilute. So you have to work together on on many levels at the same time, so that you can have that result at the end and have the sustainability. Because our situation is some different. We have to deal with the natural circulations, the natural mechanisms. You have to find methods and innovative techniques to maintain what we have there. We are bordering right away with the Atlantic Ocean. So you have from time to time very huge waves coming in. Our coastline is composed of fine sediment, not sand. So with a small disturbance and waves, things might flow back again.
Yeah.
So on the other hand, we have positive situations, which is the mud bank. And the mud bank can be very huge and can colonize by the mangroves. So we have to find ways and understanding how to keep that and to promote further, so that it can be beneficial for not only for the country but also for the whole region and world.
Definitely, yeah. And I think part of that is also that you can have regulations that help you in order to keep that going and to maintain that. So Henk, if you are hearing all of this, what do you think is the next steps that we can take in order to further work with climate positive? As in the next step is in a very practical one, right? So not really just like long-term visions, but really what would be there? What's the next step next year? What do we do next year, and with whom, in order to get it a step further?
Yeah, but it's of course it's almost like the golden egg question. But what I've been hearing, not only in the panel but also through the presentations, that the next step is already being done. My only worry, and that is the question to, I think, the whole panel and the presenters, how can each and every one in their own environment, with their own type of innovations, find an opportunity for reaching out to scaling up those solutions, but also scaling up those partnerships and making sure that we mainstream inclusive, sustainable, and integrated approaches. Because still now, although I'm inspired and I applaud everything I've been hearing, still now it only adds up to not even a percentage of global investment. And we have to find a way, therefore, to mainstream these type of efforts in businesses with better validation mechanisms, better cost-benefit analysis that really take into account not only financial economics, but across environmental, social, cultural, and economic values, mainstream them in policy to make sure that governments really step up and say, hey, yeah, SDGs and Paris are our threshold, our target. That is what we aim for, and that's what we will we mirror in our policies and regulations and in practice. And I think, again, going back to these partnerships, these type of partnerships that showcase that these innovations really work, that really means that we have to find the opportunity, public and private, and in our coalitions across the world, to mainstream, scale up, and replicate those solutions. Otherwise, the 1% stays a 1%, and tomorrow will not be an okay planet and a not okay society for our children and grandchildren. But I'm very much inspired. So I think if we hold hands together, work together continuously, radically, you could say, scaling up these type of innovations, mainstreaming it, that is going to be the new normal. Resiliency, sustainability, climate action. Then there is a better future. So I'm hopeful, but it really means we have to stick to that type of approach and our promise in scaling up our practices.
Thank you very much, Henk. Wise words they are indeed. And I think in the upscaling is where the solution is. So if you, Mr. Sharif, if you say, you have a microphone. So what do you need in order to upscale your inputs to this whole development? What would you need? With whom or what? Oh, there's, yeah,
it's
there's on.
Okay, great. In terms of scaling up, very important question. I think a lot of the solutions are there. I think a lot of, again, I'll speak from a private sector point of view, a lot of the companies, the solutions, the willingness to work on this is quite high, both from a business point of view and I think at an individual level. A lot of people like myself and many, many others, we are keen to work on such projects and contribute positively, right? The one area that I think would really serve climate positive developments is basically aligning a lot of the benefits that come out of such projects with the actual beneficiaries. So what I mean by that is that I think we all agree in this room that a lot of such projects, they have very good positive developments and it makes sense intuitively to follow through with them. Where the real gap when it comes to implementation is that you have a lot of co-benefits or benefits that are not, you know, immediately by the end user or the operator of such a project. So calculating that return on investment from a project is oftentimes quite difficult. But if we have a little bit more flexible budgeting, I think, so a lot of the beneficiaries might be, it could be even other government ministries or other government departments besides, let's say, the port authorities or the power or water authority or whoever it may be. So really having a flexible budgeting where you have different government departments being able to come together where they identify that this is a project that's cross-cutting, it has benefits to many different sectors or areas. So how can we be flexible in costing this or budgeting this in a way that we can engage the private sector effectively and really have a good ROI also on the project?
Yeah, no, I definitely agree that taking the private sector investments into it is really a step forward. It's a challenging one, but the moment we start working with it, I think we will get into a good public-private cooperation as well. So what if you would say also, how would you see this? What would you need from the government perspective to take a next step?
So I think, you know, I mean, it goes without saying that all hands on deck. That's the approach that we need to follow. So of course, governments have a role to play and corporate stewardship has a role to play. And you know, I think we've spoken a lot about the role of industry and of government, but I think one aspect that perhaps needs to be highlighted is what the financial institutions and the banking sector can do as well. And I think whenever we are talking about marine infrastructure, we are typically talking about big ticket projects that need to raise capital. And if banks are taking decisions which are aligned with ESG principles, which are aligned with sustainable blue economy principles, they have a huge scope to create a dent here. Yeah. I also think that perhaps, you know, as people who are looking at developing these projects, we also need to go back to the drawing board a bit and really analyze how can we make climate positive marine developments more bankable? You know, how do we sort of create more value out of environmental investments, but also how do we account for that value, right? And I think specifically speaking about this region, the MENA region and the Arabian Gulf specifically, there's a lot of opportunity because these are all developing economies. We are going to see a lot of infrastructure getting developed here. And so the scale of opportunity is huge. And also that this is a very unique desert and marine environment. I mean, we've spoken about the high stress environment that we're already in, high temperatures, high humidity, high sea surface temperatures as well. Yeah. So it allows for a lot of indigenous research and development, technology deployment, even regulation and business models, like unique ones that can actually come up in this region and hopefully be replicated, you know, in other high stress environments. So I think definitely the scale of opportunity is huge. And everybody does have a role to play, but I think the banking sector is something that we do need to talk about more in this context.
You recognize it as well, Mr. Dawood? Is in the upscaling, the financial sector is an important one, or is there other aspects that are also needed for the upscaling?
First of all, I would like to agree with what have been mentioned by His Excellency Dr. Hennig about that the first step have been already taken. And I think most of the countries, or most of the region, sharing one marine ecosystem, they started to take the first necessary steps. But the question is who should be involved to enhance and to enforce this first step and to improve the situation. I think the marine ecosystem is multi-dimensional or multi-sectors. It should be, many sectors should be involved to enhance the situation and to reach the upscaling of new innovative technology or whatever. First is the government. The government should enforce and have a very restricted regulation to minimize the discharge of wastes and to enhance the carbon offset, the carbon emissions from the marine ecosystem or affecting the marine ecosystem. I can give you one very small example. Yet, in GCC countries, we don't have a unique marine monitoring system to monitor the marine situation in all GCC countries. We have a small, separate, unique monitoring system here in Dubai, in Abu Dhabi, in GCC, in other GCC countries, in Oman, in Qatar, in Bahrain. Very 9 boys here, 6 boys there, with no even exchange of the data to know and to have a comprehensive understanding of what happens in this closed system, which is have a lot of economic, environmental, and social dimension in our region. We don't have this, unfortunately, up to date. So the second issue is the research, a very comprehensive and supporting the research and development centers to have more study and more understanding of what's happening on the ground and how we can scale it or improve it in the situation. We don't have a unique research center focusing on what's happening in the GCC countries on the marine ecosystem up to date. Also separate studies by this agency, by this institution, by this municipality here and there, and also when you come to the exchange of data, mostly we have a big question mark on this.
Just one moment. I see Henk just sent a message in the chat that he has to leave, isn't it, Henk? So if that is the case, I just take it.
These digital agendas are filled with commitments.
They are, right? That's. But so if you need to leave, I would just, before we finish our round of speakers here on this side here in Dubai, I would really like to thank you for your contribution. It was really worthwhile that you've been here. I think it's a great contribution that you've made, and also linking the Netherlands with the work here. So thank you very much, and we will keep you updated also on the outcomes of the afternoon sessions with the roundtables.
Thank you all. Best of success. And I really feel encouraged and inspired by this session. So really look forward to follow-ups. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Sorry for that. I just had to...
Thank you very much. The next sector is the private sector. We should now have a program to involve and to have participation from the private sectors in the initiatives and the projects enhancing the resilience of the marine ecosystem and working toward this environmental sustainable marine ecosystem within our region. Unfortunately, also the private sector involvement in our region is a little bit late and weak. It is not that strong, not much enough, and their involvement is mostly also fragmented from here or there, from this society, non-governmental organized society or this non-governmental organized society, but not on a big scale. The support of the research and development by the industrial sector. The industrial sector should support the research and development to be able to upscale. Without their financial support, logistic support, the research and development have a lack of financial resources to enhance their result and to come from laboratory scale up to commercial scale. Without this interlink between the industrial commercial sector and the research and development sectors, we still have a big question mark on this up to date. However, we have a lot of financial resources in some agencies and institutions, but we don't have this. Education and awareness, public participation, all this can help us to improve the situation in the future and to achieve our targets.
Thank you. with Nepal.
Yeah.
If we're talking about scaling up, it's also scaling up about like the restoration efforts, right? Like the ones that you are doing with the mangroves. How do you see the scaling up as a challenge and as an opportunity? What do you need to further that scaling up?
Indeed, this is a challenge. We have started in 2015 with implementation. We got support from various NGOs and organizations, but on small scale. First of all, we needed a kind of a proven technology, because seeing is believing. That is first of all. To scale up, we have now experiences, we have some lessons learned. With these we can go further. But you need for these finance, you need for these support from the government, legislations, enforcement institutions, and last but not least, you need capacity building, you need capacity transfer also. Because I talked about ownership is supposed to be transferred to the local communities, the coastal communities. They have to take it over, because if they are engaged in, if they find the resources, the livelihood, the protection, because our coast is very low, if they find all these values of this mangrove ecosystem, I think you can make leaps sprung. But what is necessary is the finance. Since it is for a general public, since it is for a global, on a global scale, you have to work together with all organizations, including the large companies which we have now, and also on all scales. I think in that direction we're supposed to work together so that we can go on a higher scale up.
Thank you very much. So it's 12:30 here in Dubai for all of you who are at home watching as well. We are heading towards our break. I think it has been a very inspirational morning. We've heard a lot of things. For example, and if you want to upskill, it's not only that you need your system understanding from a physical, natural perspective, but also the social system that you need to understand and all the actors that are involved. The financial part of that, legislation, regulation, but also monitoring and sharing that data that comes from monitoring and making that available makes also linkages between the different actors. And this interdisciplinary part of working is really relevant. And we will take especially that dialogue on how do we work together between the different disciplines in order to help the upscaling into the afternoon session, where we will have roundtables and we will look at the upscaling and implementation of climate-positive developments from these different angles. So from the ecosystem perspective, the engineering perspective, financial and governance perspectives. And we will see in how the dialogue will change, that after a while you will be mixed, you get into a different discipline, and then how do you continue the dialogue? So that is after the lunch. I would now like to thank you all for this morning and your participation in the panel especially. I would like to give all of you a large round of applause, and then we'll be back here at 1:30. Yes, thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to be back. This afternoon we will be working in roundtable discussions to further the ideas on climate-positive marine developments. For that we have a short introduction to explain you the idea of the afternoon, and then we will go to the breakout sessions. In my presentation you will see how we will organize that. Next slide, please. So during the roundtable discussions, we really aim to see how we can realize climate, how can we really do it in practice. And for that, we are looking at the opportunities and the challenges in the next step, like also in the panel have been decided. And we want to use a hypothetical case for that, so that we can really go into more of the nitty-gritty details of things. And to get toward it, really to work towards concrete ideas for next steps. So they might be on the ground. They might be really like making you also connect with other people to see, okay, perhaps together we can develop this idea one step further. Next slide, please. So if we are now looking in if you would say, like a more hypothetical current way of developing in marine ecosystems, you might look at it from a fairly monofunctional way, right? You can say, okay, I need a port, and I need some hard coastal protection in order to protect that port, and perhaps there's some people that need to live there, and there's shipping that has to come in, and perhaps you need to do some sand nourishment here and there. And this is kind of the business as usual, as we would say in the most simple ways of representing it. But if we talk about these climate positive marine developments, this might look very different. Next slide, please. And if we would say, okay, we take the same approach, we want to have a port on an island somewhere in the middle of the sea. Can we make that into a green port? And can we make that island where we locate this port into a much more attractive place for people to actually be? So for example, can we work towards a greener city for the people that live there? Or can we have mangrove coastal protection in part of this that area? Or can we see tidal ponds in part of, and how do we connect desalination plants with agriculture in greenhouses, in high-tech development venues? What do we do for example, aquaculture, wind energy? So you see there's a lot more happening in this same area. Because of course you have to think of like when you're doing a development, you're doing it at a given location, and there's a lot of things that you can do at that given location, and it is the choices that you make in realizing that. So next slide, please. So for this roundtable discussion, so we're going to peel the onion further down into different layers. We have been looking into dividing the topics into 4 different subsections, talking about the environment and the ecology aspects, the engineering, the governance, and the financing aspects. We have hybrid teams meetings, so at each of the tables, we will have one of these groups. After the break, the moderators will change with the topic to a next table, so you stay at a table in your Teams link if you are online, and then you get a new topic at your table. So in each of these rounds, you have discussions. For those who are online, there is links in the chat to check in to the Zoom meetings that are being projected at the different tables. And then the moderators will walk around. And after these 2 rounds, we will have feedback in a plenary session by the moderators who are helping you through the discussion, and to also come up with like, okay, how do we take the next step together, and what can we really do? So Robin already in the morning mentioned the white paper. That's one of those things that you can contribute to, for example. Next slide, please. And now, for these pitches, the moderators, they get some extra guidance, so focus it really towards these concrete actions and results. And also to see that you go beyond the commonalities and like the general statement, everybody wants to do something about climate change, and everybody wants to contribute. Yeah, but how? Really how? And make it, what is your next step next month, and next year, and in 2 years from now? So make it really to that level. And also get the connect in that discussions from the 2 tables. So what if there's an argument from engineering? What does that then need from the finance perspective? So some of the suggestions, perhaps also think about like what kind of stakeholders do you need, or what kind of cross connections do you need beyond the 2 tables that you are linked to. But most of all, I think what's really important is that you are inspired, right? Especially for those online. I know a full day Zoom meeting is quite tough. I feel pity for you in a bit, but definitely you do have the opportunity to meet new people and to interact and to have fun. And also we will start the first round by just giving you the opportunity to introduce yourself, to make that connection. I mean, you're here, it's all people work in the end, right? And it's us doing the work together to create that better positive development. So with that said, next slide, please. This is a bit of the logistics for the afternoon. Here in Dubai, We have 4 tables. There's one here in the boardroom, that's number 1. Right outside is number 2. That's number 3. And that's number 4. And you see here, each number of the tables has a different topic. So if you go to table ecology, our moderator is Simon Wilson, who is online waiting for you already there on the screen. For those of you who are online, you can use the tiny URL to get to that room if you're interested in it. Same goes for the engineering, where Afifa Kombanestu Shavana, she is from Van Noord, she will be helping the moderation. And then we have from governance, we have Kasturi, he's online as well. And then for finance is our colleague from Deltares, Lieke Heiskens, she's online too. So we have already a few moderators online. So after the first round, table number 1 gets, after ecology, gets the governance subject. And engineering becomes finance. So if you're talking about engineering, after the break, you talk about the financing part. And you can really see how that is going to change your perspective. So stay at your number. It's the moderators who are going to shift. Now, if the groups are too small online, because we don't really know yet how many people there are online, we might need to merge some of the groups together. But that is how we will see what is the best way forward. And after the table discussion, we come back to the main event. So if you're online, that means you go back from the Teams meeting into the platform. And there we have the general feedback. And there will also be an interactive Q&A. So if you're from at home, you also have additional questions, then you can put them in the chat and we can see how here in the room we can respond to your questions as well. So we now have a few moments to move to the tables. And well, enjoy the afternoon session, everybody. Thank you. All right, good afternoon, everybody. We're back after the breakout sessions. I think we had some really interesting discussions with all of you online and also here in the room. We're now going to get some feedback from the different tables. So we will start with Simon Wilson, who has been first at the ecology table and then moved to the governance table. So if we can get Simon on the screen, because he is online. Hi, Simon.
Hello.
So I'd like to invite you to give a small pitch on the discussion results that you have been gathering, and then we take it from there.
Yes, sure. I mean, if the screen can be shared, then I can put the findings on the screen. Otherwise, I can just run through them.
Simon, you can share your own screen with the presentation if you can.
Okay, it's currently disabled, but okay. Perhaps that can be changed.
Okay, they're working on that.
Okay, I'll start then, and just give me a heads up when that's ready.
I think
it's ready now. It seems.
Oh, is it? Okay, that's great. Good. Sorry. Let me organize that this end a bit better. Good, just loading it up now.
Yeah, you started sharing your screen. It takes a bit of time here for the slides to really come up, but we see a little sentence. There you are.
It does.
Yeah, now we see it.
Do you see the correct presentation?
No, Simon, this is your earlier one.
Okay.
Yeah, here we are. This one is good.
You've got it. Okay. Good. Good. So is that, we're good to go?
Yes, you are. Go ahead.
Excellent. So thank you everyone who participated in these roundtables. Very, very interesting. On the front of the slide, I've kept ecology, engineering, governance, and finance in there, even though we were really focused on ecology and governance, because a lot of this is really trying to separate things that are very difficult to separate, and in my view, really shouldn't be separated. This should be considered as an integrated whole. So there's that's quite a deliberate attempt there. So in terms of the opportunities, we spoke at some length about habitat restoration, particularly of degraded habitats. And in this context, we were talking particularly about degraded habitats that weren't necessarily associated with developments. So this is a development independent measure that needs to be taken, is a general improvement of habitat restoration, not limited to outside of projects, but it could be integrated into project design, for example. In addition, but separate and distinct from habitat restoration, we made sure that it was identified that maintaining conditions that allow for natural regenerative processes to be maintained should be protected. So, for example, you know, in low energy shorelines where there's a risk of disturbance arising from high energy wave energy coming to shore, those shorelines could be protected with various devices and so on. In addition to maintaining the natural systems, there is opportunity for habitat creation, in particular integrating these things into project design. And this would involve the substitution of, say, engineered structures with enhanced engineered structures that are designed for a biodiversity-related benefit. So surfaces that are more textured, that allow for specific types of organisms to colonize them. There's real potential to integrate positive impact aquaculture into projects. Seaweed, for example, is a good way of helping with acidification and withdrawing carbon dioxide out of the marine environment, particularly if that biomass is then used beneficially. But bivalves equally are a good way of improving water quality. So there are some opportunities here that have ecosystem benefits associated with them. Inspired by Ad's discussion and talk this morning, we felt that integrating an artistic or creative dimension into infrastructure design or restoration efforts would be beneficial. And it's necessary to integrate the kind of the commercial or financial aspect of ecology, i.e. ecosystem services, into project designs so that either affected communities or other stakeholders can derive some form of benefit. So these were the opportunities we identified. We didn't spend quite so long on the challenges, but we identified a few. First of all, design of such projects. This is an emerging field and it requires a multidisciplinary team. So particularly engineers and ecologists need to come together, but not limited to those people, so that any intervention is properly designed. And we had a good example of you know, an artificial reef that was intended to grow or be colonized by corals being installed at a depth that was just too deep for that to really happen effectively. A number of stakeholders involved need to understand the project so that they can be more supportive, have a better degree of ownership on them. So, and again, we had a good example where the Coast Guard on a project didn't really understand what this intervention was all about and were really unsupportive. So that could be changed through better stakeholder engagement. And in particular, where we're talking about developments underwater or offshore, those sorts of benefits and the kind of system that we're dealing with would need to be visualized better. So using audio visuals, filming underwater so that people who are involved, stakeholders or beneficiaries, can really visualize what the intervention means, how it's going to be beneficial, and that would enhance the effectiveness of awareness raising and education. And then finally, a point is this issue of trying to separate biodiversity from climate change. It's rather an artificial separation. They're so closely linked that they really need to be dealt with in an integrated way. So let's not try and separate climate from biodiversity. These are two parts of the same problem. So moving on to the next steps, and again, we took guidance from the speaker this morning, like thinking about very tangible activities, starting with what could be done next month and really going out to the horizon of maybe 2 or 3 years from now. In terms of engagement, one of the next steps would be to enhance that process is to identify people in authority who can serve as champions and bring stakeholders together and beneficiaries together and really show some leadership in this respect. And that would help ultimately to develop more ownership of a project, as well as building trust. And trust was an issue that was discussed mostly in the finance roundtable, but obviously we've taken that on board here. Then a more kind of intimate engagement with some of the stakeholders. And again, this was a particular project example where the Coast Guard needed to have their awareness of what these interventions are raised in order for them to be more supportive of a project. Looking a bit more into the future, a facility for sharing experiences, particularly lessons learned and positive delivery or positive outcomes, would be very useful. And in particular for projects that are offshore or underwater, where not everyone has huge access there. And we note and recognize the importance of making sure that this is not just peer-to-peer, but there is a transgenerational aspect to this, i.e. students and training and part of the education, mainstreaming this into a more educational type set of institutions. It would be very beneficial to really be clear about the benefits of some of these interventions. So developing and pitching the actual business case, not necessarily purely in terms of financial benefits, but other forms of capital, social capital and intellectual property and so on, natural capital, of course, would really help communicate these ideas to particularly investors, project developers, project owners who understand that kind of language. Again, the form of language needs to be simplified, less jargon, make sure that everyone is fully understanding the concepts that are being communicated here. So that obviously needs to be taken into account. Scale is a huge challenge, and we heard from Eric some of the contributing factors to that, but obviously it's an imperative. And then finally, this network facilitation really ties in with point number 3, sharing positive experiences, but also kind of serving as a marketplace, let's say, for innovators who are doing the kind of experimental work and getting their technology readiness levels moving up from, you know, fairly low to a higher level, combining them or allowing them to engage more with, you know, the demand side of here, which would be governments and project developers. And through that process to help develop a community of practice that can facilitate the scaling up of these initiatives. So that's a summary of what we discussed. So I'll leave it there, and I'll hand back to the moderator for this. And incidentally, I must add, I'm afraid I'll have to drop off at 4 o'clock. I've got another appointment. So if I disappear without saying goodbye, apologies, but it's been a real pleasure and positive experience to participate in all of it. So thank you to everyone who's made this such an interesting day.
Well, thank you very much, Simon. Perhaps if there's any questions from the room or perhaps also from the online community to Simon, you can also send them perhaps via email to him. I don't know whether there's already an online chat available. I'm just looking at the technical team. It's not yet. So Simon, if there's from the online some questions, we will ensure that they are being forwarded to you.
Fantastic. Delighted to engage with anyone on any of this. So yeah, most happy to do that.
Yeah, because I think it was really good that we had a bit more of an in-depth discussion as well, with a few concrete examples and to get to know a few more people. And I really like the ideas of the workshop. It's really concrete. It's really helping a specific project one step further, perhaps even. But also to develop a fuller community of practice here in the region, where we would also invite more people from different disciplinary backgrounds to really exchange like we're doing today, might be a really interesting step to just gear it up to also scale up in the near future. So thank you very much. I think that if we then move to the next table, I would like to ask the engineering ecology feedback from Afifa to see if you can share your screen. Thank you, Simon. Afifa made a few slides as well, but then they would have to be put on the screen. Does that work? Did you send the USB key to them? I'll move here a little bit. Oh, there they are. Afifa, go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. So we had a very interesting discussion, mainly because we had people from various fields coming in together. First slide, please. Yeah, as I said, I'm working in the dredging industry, also with coral rehabilitation. Then we had someone from managed wastewater treatment, desalination, renewable energy. So it was very interesting to talk about various aspects. So basically, we identified seawater rise as one of the main problems with regards to marine development. And we have concentrated on 3 aspects, that is energy, freshwater, and wastewater treatment. So we have combined all of these to give some solid solutions. The first one that came up was industrial filtration system, to design a filtration system that makes use of both saline and freshwater characteristics. And the ecological advantage of such a system is that we can eventually create a better habitat for fishes, and we can think of other approaches like recreation at the developed sand area, all of that. The second one came from the desalination expert. She asked for a zero liquid discharge desalination system. So in this way, right now what's happening in this area is that we discharge the salt water directly after treatment into the sea. But instead of that, you could actually treat the brine and use it for commercial and industrial use. Thereby, there is no discharge at all into the sea. And the third solution that we came up was to create new habitat. Coming from the dredging industry, we have a lot of experiences where we dispose the dredged sand offshore, but instead of that, we could think of possibilities where we can reuse that sand to create a new habitat. For instance, use it for creating mangroves after checking the soil properties. Like he said, there's an example where you can create this freshwater treatment system. The algae can be used for mussel and oyster growth. So in that way, you create a lot of solutions that can eventually turn out as a good habitat for other species. And the last one is restoring habitats, and also I should add to this protection of habitats. So when we take up new marine projects, there are instances where we have to cut through coral ecosystems or seagrass ecosystems. We had a very recent project in Mozambique where the pipeline was cutting right through the coral ecosystem. So instead of doing that, we called for an alternate solution that was to change the route of the pipeline. We know it's a lengthier route, but still it did protect a lot of corals, and we also relocated whatever coral that was going to be destroyed. So whenever there is a project, you have to look for opportunities to save the marine habitat from destruction. So these are a few of the points that we discussed, but what I noticed in all of these solutions is that we always have to think about a multifunctional approach when you think about any kind of infrastructure, be it any concrete structure, be it buildings. Always think about different ways of using the project. So we can think of recreation, we can think of reusing the land, species development, habitat development, anything. And the next step was to involve the local communities when you create a solution. Like many of the time, like coming from my country, I come from India, there are instances where people from outside come and work, but then the local people are not involved. But many a times, the local people might know about the very basic characteristics or things that happen. So it's very important to involve the local communities as part of these nature-based solutions. Next slide. Next, talking about the challenges, we did identify quite a few. The first one, and I think this was a common challenge that was identified in the other tables as well, and this was lack of considering environmental factors in the pre-tendering stage. Like when we, as a contractor, when we get a project, the EIA has already been prepared and everything has been approved. So there's not much we can do to change the EIA. But if an environmental engineer or a local stakeholder is involved from the first stage, then he or she can think about the basic problems and even give new technological solutions. So it is very, very important to involve multi-stakeholder approach in the pre-tendering phase. The next one is the mentality of not being ready to change. I work in business development department, and this is something that I have to face on a day-to-day basis. Like, there is a system that is being practiced since the years, and people are not ready to. Everyone says it's a good solution, it's a good idea, but then when it finally comes to signing the paper, they say no, we have to go with the approved one because there's no proof of project and so on. So that's another problem. And the third one is, of course, cost implications. As sometimes the nature-based solution might get a little bit more costlier than the normal solution. But it is hard to convince the client about the long-term benefit of this nature-based solution that we are giving them. And the final one is spatial and temporal challenges. This is, again, another challenge that I've recently faced in my work. So I work with the coral rehabilitation team, and we are pushing for breeding of coral reefs. That is to practically create new coral reefs by sexual reproduction. But the thing that's been going on in the Middle East so far is asexual reproduction or fragmentation of coral reefs. So, but even though fragmentation gives faster results, it does not give a long-term solution. But the sexual reproduction could do that. But it is very, very hard to convince people that this is the better option, because everyone wants to see a result in 2 years' time, which is not sometimes possible with nature-based solutions. Next slide. So going on to the next step, the first thing that is to be done is to make the government authorities be aware that it is important to include the contractor and the stakeholders, the people who are going to be affected by the project from the very early stage of the project. Next one is think of multifunctionality approaches in the nature-based solutions. And the third one, and this is perhaps a very important thing, and that can be done in a very in the next day, starting the next day as well. That is to make awareness on climate funding options to the people. Because I see there are a lot of funds available, like the Green Climate Fund, there's the United Nations Fund, the UAE government has a lot of fund, but eventually no one knows how to get it. I go talk to the ministry, I go to the people, but most people do not know how to apply for it or how can we access that. So it is very important that all these climate funding, it is there, but it is not being made aware to the general people who are working in this field. So these are a couple of next immediate steps that could be taken for a climate positive development. Yeah. I hope that was interesting.
Well,
Thank
it's very
you.
nice to hear that. And I think it also links very well with this idea of like a community of practice. So, and if you then also can share that information there about the funding opportunities or the cooperation opportunities, that really would help in the dialogue to really start doing this in practice, right? Yeah. So that's really nice. Then we have one more table left. So I don't know who will be the one reporting back from that one. Is that Lieke? Lieke will be on this screen, so thank you, Afifa.
Hi, Alice. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but I cannot yet see you. And I hope that that will be solved very soon, or that you can share your slides. I'm looking at the people in the technical. Oh, there we come. Almost.
There's no video.
There, I see your name. It's not yet. I do hear you very well.
Yeah, well, that's one thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Otherwise, you just start talking.
Lieke, you need to turn on your video. Did you do it?
It is on.
Oh, is it?
It is on, but I just see maybe there's something in the settings.
Otherwise, you can you share your screen with if you have made some slides? I mean, in the end, we will need to see your slides. So.
Yeah, I would prefer to share my video than my slides.
Yes.
But if this is the, let's see. It's a shame.
Well, it's okay. I mean, I think we're doing pretty well in the hybrid anyway. It's a whole day of hybrid presentations, so...
Lieke, is your Teams call still open? Because Benjamin just mentioned that that might be the culprit.
Maybe.
If you just close all
I
Teams.
will close my Teams.
Yeah, and then it would take a little bit of time normally for the camera to switch.
Yeah, perhaps.
How are you managing, Lieke?
I think, yeah, there was one window in Zoom or in Teams still open, so maybe now my camera will
pick up.
Maybe switch it off and on again.
No, not yet. Otherwise, you just start talking. Is that the easiest way?
Yes.
There you are.
Yeah. Oh, there you are.
There you are.
Hello. Good to see you.
Yeah, also happy to see you and to see myself on the screen in front of me now.
Yeah.
First of all, thank you so much for the opportunity to be part of this journey today. I'm aware that some of you might not have met me because I don't think I've met everybody at the round table. So maybe just very briefly, my name is Lieke Husken. I work at Deltares, so I'm a colleague of both Alice and Robin, and I work closely together with Monica Altimirano, also on the work that was presented before about bridging the implementation gap. So that being said, today I think the hybrid construction really surprised me. It worked well. There was this last hiccup here, but also that turned out fine. We had a lot of interesting ideas, interesting thoughts, interesting discussions. And I appreciated very much also in the roundtables how open everybody was in sharing their issues, which already reflects on one of the topics that we actually discussed, which is trust, and how trust is such an important component of being able to successfully upskill nature-based solutions, going towards climate positive investments, but also trust between government and communities, trust in the technology and the performance of the technology. And just to start off this pitch, I think there was sufficient trust within the discussions of the round table, and it shows also the commitment and this keenness that was already mentioned in the keynote lectures of the people present here to really go for climate positive projects. So that being said, I will just go through the opportunities that we were discussing. What was very, very valuable in our discussions was the Suriname case and the input related to that case that could make a lot of the theoretical things that we discussed, it could make it more tangible. So thanks for bringing that up, and for making our discussions tangible. The first opportunity that we've been discussing is zooming out. This process of zooming out, breaking silos, looking a little bit broader than we're used to. It allows us to explore other options. It allows us to include sort of the unusual suspects. And it allows us to find win-win situations. And again, there was a very nice example from Suriname, where saline crops production, ecotourism, these were identified as opportunities and also needs from the local community. So the local community needs were included in the analysis and the zooming out part of shaping the project, but also the opportunities for energy production and how certain energy producing technologies might actually also reduce the risk that was underlying the nature-based solution initiative in the first place, such as the sedimentation and erosion problems that they were facing. So looking beyond the original scope really opens up opportunities. Another opportunity that was shared is the fact that there's more and more public parties that are taking a stance and being proactive in contributing to mitigating climate change, adapting to climate change, and even going for climate positive solutions. And I was very grateful to hear also about the way that Shell is going even beyond corporate social responsibility, and that they see nature-based solutions and upscaling nature-based solutions. They include it also as an opportunity for investment. And having said that, what I also found very interesting in that reflection is that they have different metrics. So they measure their ambitions and objectives, and they have different metrics for that. So pursuing social objectives and environmental objectives doesn't necessarily need the same type of return on investment or profit as other types of commercial investments do. But there's also the merging opportunity of social, environmental, and commercial investments and the returns on that. I'm sort of merging to the challenges and the next steps also here. One of the challenges and also one of the next steps is to create more portfolios and to think more along the lines of a transition. And this transition could include repurposing existing infrastructure, but also merging the benefits of green and gray infrastructure. And the transition approach also allows us to consider what are the impacts and the benefits that are required immediately, and what are the impacts that we desire on a more long term, over time, because sometimes the urgency is so present that we don't have the time to spend a lot of time in the exploration and innovation phase, but action needs to be taken. So taking a more transition perspective on that allows us to also include these short and long-term trade-offs. Let me go to the next point here. One of the challenges and also opportunities is the need for local authorities to take stance in their spatial planning processes, and to be clear about that, and to be available and reachable for both research institutes and private parties to contribute to the spatial planning processes. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay, I heard a hiccup. There was one other example that was given, which is the concept of living labs and the concept of an experience hub that was created in Scheveningen. And this experience hub is a step that can be further explored. because it allows us to create a shared vision of the future that we envision. It allows us to overcome. It allows us to collaborate, positioning such a living lab or such an experience hub. It bridges the gap between different stakeholders and allows for more collaboration. There were so many things that were interesting that we discussed. I think I've mentioned most of the important steps that we and most of the important topics that we have discussed in our round the table discussions today. So I think I will leave it at that, and I would like to thank everybody for participating and for contributing to the inputs.
Thank you very much, Lieke. It's really nice to hear these pitches and the feedbacks that you get from the different discussions. I think we all picked up new ideas on various aspects of them. What you said now, Lieke, about the impact and the benefits right now versus the one perhaps a little bit longer into the future is really something to communicate well, also with people that have to make a decision whether to go or not go for a climate positive development. Because if they can realize that it's not only now but also your future benefits, then we start taking a whole different road, I think, as well. Is there anyone from the room here that would like to ask a question to Lieke or to, for example, to Afifa? Or are we all getting a bit tired after the whole day? It's quite warm here at the moment in the pavilion. Go ahead. Yeah, or perhaps, Robin, if you will give the microphone, that might be a good idea. Yeah.
Well, first of all,
can you introduce yourself quickly?
My name is Sander de Tombe from the Dutch Marine Energy Center. We're trying to develop that living lab.
Yeah.
So thank you for pointing that out. And I think all the points that were raised very interesting. And now I go to my question is actually what will be done with this information?
Shall I just take a stab at that?
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
Everything that has been discussed and collected so far will gather, and we plan to make a white paper type of publication out of this. I think it will be a white paper which will be inspirational and for use for anyone who is here today and contributed to it. So while consider this already as an open invitation for whoever wants to contribute and help with writing that white paper, please get in touch with us, because we really would like to, well, this is a good harvest today. We've had very good ideas. I think that they link very nicely together. I was just thinking that the fact that we swapped this round table, it nicely starts to tie into each other. Huh? It's not more silo thinking here. This is really finding these cross links, which is a very important part here. And I like the transition part, Lieke. I think this is also something that can tag along on energy transition if we just hop on that train, maybe, because people start to understand the concept of an energy transition. So if we can also do that towards these kind of things, let's make use of that. So these kind of pointers, lessons learned, next steps, we would like to collect that into a white paper and, well, spread it around in the world as being the first step towards real implementation of climate positive marine developments. Thank you for the question, Sandra. I think it's a good one.
Any other questions or responses to that? No, I guess from online, and you can't see anything on the chat,
no
right? That's again there. Just keep in touch, I would say, and perhaps we will leave it with this.
Yeah.
Maybe just one last remark.
Go ahead, Lieke.
Alice.
Yes.
What I found really surprising and also very motivating is when we joined the engineering table, is that the first reaction they gave to our summary is that these are actually also all of the things that we discussed at this table. And what I hear from all of the pitches is that a lot of the same elements they were brought up, and it shows how this holistic perspective is already something that we are that is already in our heads. So just the thing that surprised me, but also that I think is very positive from these round tables.
Yeah, and I think we need more of these round tables with the people from the different disciplines, because we start to understand each other a lot better. So, and that really helps.
Good. Well, with that, Lieke, thank you so much for that addition, and I think we'll just close off for today. I think we had a great day, very inspiring. I learned a lot, seen a lot. Thank you so much for being here and your contributions, very valuable. Like I said, we will follow up with the white paper, make sure that this is just a starting point and not the end point. And thank you so much for being here. I wish you a good time here still at the Expo and in Dubai, and hope we will stay in touch. But thank you so much. Oh yes, and one thing, thank you very much. Also a big thank you to the technical staff supporting, the Pavilion, the consulate, the people in The Hague for helping out with us. We couldn't have done this without you. Very professional staff, so this is a very good, encouraging first event for the rest of the Expo. So thank you so much, and a big hand out to you guys as well.